Okay. I call to order the Riviera Beach Community Redevelopment Agency workshop for January 27th. The time is 6:07 p.m. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Commissioner McCoy?
Here.
Commissioner Lanier?
Here.
Commissioner Miller-Anderson?
Present.
Vice Chair Lawson?
Here.
Chair Botel?
Here. And others, the director.
Also present, Jonathan Evans, Executive Director, Michael Haygood, General Counsel, and Tamara Sagan, CRA Clerk.
Thank you. We'll have a moment of silence followed by the Pledge of Allegiance led by Council Commissioner Lawson.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And please remember the passing of one of our colleagues' mother recently. Roderick McCoy's mother passed recently, so we give him our condolences. Mr. Evans, you ready?
Madam Chair and members of the board and residents and community members, the intent behind this discussion this evening is to talk about Marina Phase 2. Based on the last conversation we had with the board, there was a desire to have a more substantive and robust conversation about Marina Phase 2. In staff's conversations with the joint development team, as well as the developers, APD, TESRA Development, there were certain questions that were proffered to staff that were substantive in nature and required some policy direction as to how the board wished to proceed. So we thought that this particular venue would be the opportune venue to have some discussion with the board. It is staff's intent to get clear directives from the board as to how we can move this particular project forward and then how we can move into subsequent phases. There are 16 questions that have been provided for discussion this evening, as well as a presentation from the developer to highlight some of the aspects that may have been forgotten by some as it relates to their particular project. After consensus is provided by the board as it relates to the 16 questions and any other comments that staff may have, it's our intent to look to move into subsequent phases, whether it's individual elements or it's looking at the project in its entirety. The conversations that we have had have been very productive. We have been able to find common ground on some of the items that were discussed previously. And so through this presentation, there will be parts where Mr. Scott Evans as well as Ms. Anita Jenkins will provide some perspective and clarity with regards to some of the items that were discussed and some additional comments that we may need from the board to be able to move this particular project forward. In the memorandum contained in the agenda packet, you've seen that this project has been going on for a substantial amount of time and multiple conversations. It is our intent to be able to leave here with some deliverables as well as a clear pathway forward as it relates to this particular project. This started in January 24th, 2018, and is our intent to look to move through this process as responsible and as swiftly as possible and provide all the assurities to the residents as well as the board that the negotiations as well as these phases are done so in an appropriate manner with transparency and making sure that we do not put the community or any of our resources at risk. So at this particular moment, Madam Chair, I would like to invite Mr. Tony Brown to commence with the presentation from the development team, APD, TESRA Development, and I believe his partners are also attending via our online portal. Mr. Brown?
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. J. Evans, and we appreciate the opportunity to highlight the board on our plan, as well as the questions we presented to staff that I think together we're both looking for direction. Von Irons, my partner, co-developer from Atlanta, he has COVID-related restrictions to travel, and so he'll be joining us online as soon as he gets from a doctor's appointment. We also have online Jeff Pacey of Municipal Acquisitions, and they've provided the financing commitment for parking, which I'll go into. And then in the audience, you have my partner, Ezra Saffold. He's the other half of Tesra. And then we also have two other partners, Jill Lanigan from Song & Associates, who's our architect, and then Josh Tonneson, whom you'll hear from me later. They'll be our development partner. He's with the Cornerstone Group, and they've done several projects here in Riviera Beach and particularly in South Florida. So with that, I'll just get started with the presentation. I think they're pulling it up. I was tap dancing long enough there, Tamara.
Sorry.
If not, I can give you a... While she's pulling it up, one of the things I wanted to explain is who is APDS Tesra? Because you've heard us say on a couple of occasions that we are not a joint venture. We are actually co-developers. And I'm going to explain what I mean by that. And then also our goals for this discussion is to secure clarity and direction on key questions that we've proposed, and I believe staff also has questions. We want to get some feedback on the conceptual design and our phasing plan. Clearly, where we want to go and what we presented was pre-COVID. We were directed, as you know, APD and Tesra both competed to do this project separately. We were directed to take our individual plans and to merge them, which we have. And so I think perhaps for the first time, you may be seeing the reconciled presentation between both firms. And we've gotten to know APD, and we thank you for encouraging us to work together, because we feel that together we're stronger than either of us would have been separately. And I've had a chance to visit Mr. Iron's projects in Atlanta, and he's seen what I'm doing in other parts of this state, and we're quite grateful and have built actually a great rapport in working together, and you'll hear about what this partnership entails. So I'm just waiting on, all right. If we can go to goals for discussion.
Can you give me that?
Do you want me to give you a PowerPoint? Okay, excuse me. As Mr. J. Evans explained, as we go through the presentation, and we're going to do it quickly, and I think staff is going to come back with the specific questions, but if there is something you see, or if you have a question as we present, we'll take it. I'll try to be brief, and then maybe save the dialogue for later. But we structured our presentation to answer some of the key questions that were presented to us. And so, without further ado, let me go forward. Next slide. I talked about our goals for discussion, and we hope that the outcome of this is that we'll get the authorization to negotiate to begin phase one, and we will define what phase one will be in this presentation. As I mentioned, I'm going to tell a little bit about who this co-development partnership is and the responsibilities between us, which is important because the significant question you've asked is, do we have the financing capability to do this project? And to know how we've assigned and separate our responsibilities will let you know who's responsible for doing what and which co-developer is responsible for demonstrating their financing capabilities. And then obviously our questions will lead to your guidance, and that will define our next steps. Next page. Previous page. So first question you've asked, does the city and the CRA, well, first question we asked of your staff and of you, do you understand the agreement between us and our co-development process? So we have paid for, we have defined and paid for an operating agreement that will define a limited liability company to be formed. The structure is based pretty much on guidance we got from your legal staff indicating that they wanted one entity to be responsible for the master development agreement, and we think that we have accomplished that. As co-developers, we have responsibilities for the parts, and it's not a joint venture, and I'll explain that. There's equal ownership between APDS and TESRA. We're 50-50 owners. I am a co-manager with Mr. Irons, and between Mr. Irons' company, APDS, and our company that I have with Mr. Saffold, we own, or the company is 75% minority owned. Urban Retail is a venture partner of APDS, and they are separately in our operating agreement, and they have a 25% share of this entity. And we have negotiated the responsibilities between us. And so the agreement has been provided to Mr. Haygood, and it's under review, but we went through a discussion of assigning our development rights. So you can see in the matrix to the right that TESRA is responsible for the structured parking that we propose to be on elements 7 and 8. We're also responsible for the residential mixed-use development, also on elements 7 and 8, blocks 7 and 8. Together with APD, we're developing the hotel, and that is proposed on Site 6, Restaurant Row, along the waterfront, the public market and food hall, we've defined as element 5 in the site plan, and I'll bring this up shortly. And then there's an element, the ground floor commercial in element 7 is also intended to be a sort of festival marketplace. And again, we understand the challenges in this current COVID environment, but we feel very strongly that our nation will overcome this crisis and we'll get back to normal. APD, again, because of their strengths, particularly with urban retail, is largely responsible for everything else. And you can see going down their column that we have assigned, even though we're developing elements 7 and 8, we will be working with them to lease out the commercial space on the ground floor in both of those buildings. The hotel development is 6, as I mentioned, is a co-responsibility. The restaurant row is APD's responsibility. The public market food hall is APD's. The event center management and the build out is APD, along with activating Bicentennial Park and the beach park. And I'm looking in the back in case Mr. Irons is on. If he's not on, I'll do his parts. So the third question in our matrix was, do we have a consensus on the conceptual site plan? And as I mentioned, next page. Next page. As I mentioned, we had to reconcile 2 visions into one, and we have. We thought it was important in that you had invested heavily in the phase 1 infrastructure, that we wanted to stay consistent to what was approved at the time as the Marina Master Plan, and that as we develop in phases, it allows us the flexibility to develop per a timeline, and we understand the importance of the water views, and our proposal, even at 7 and 8, is that current zoning goes up to 8 stories, but it's intended to be built on top of a parking deck, and that enhances the water views east. Our plan called for 1,600 parking spaces, up to 320 apartment units, 50 to 80,000 square feet of retail and restaurant, 130-room hotel, attractions at Bicentennial Park, and enhanced opportunities for local entrepreneurs in the festival marketplace. This, you can see it as part of a massing diagram. The numbers reflect what I just said in the previous slide. Element 8, we know as Spanish Courts. Element 7 is your gateway into the marina, particularly at the south end at Broadway and 13th Street. And the event center is Element O. Next. This is an architectural rendering of the site plan. Again, we've not dialogued with your staff, and so the architectural guidelines is one that we recognize will likely be a negotiable item. This is shown just to give you an idea of scale. The vision was that we would start with the maximum density that zoning currently allow at 8 stories with the public space, and that we would step down as we went closer to the water so that every house or every resident on the east side could have, for the most part, an unobstructed water view. The residential sits on top of the parking garage, where you see number 5, that's where we see the Festival Marketplace, enhanced by a linear park that would draw the commercial activity at the ground floor in Building 7, and with 2 horizontal buildings flanking both ends of the linear park that we envision to be a great market opportunity for smaller entrepreneurs that will really make the marina that vibrant. 1, 2, and 3 represents Restaurant Row, and then APD had some great ideas for activating Bicentennial Park. Next. So a very important question, and one that has come up repeatedly. Do we have the financial capacity to do what we've proposed? And so we're going to just give 2 examples, element 8, and then I'm still looking to see if Mr. Irons on, and he'll talk about elements 0 and 1. Again, this organizational structure is probably more legalese and probably has more validation or importance to Mr. Haygood, who needs to look at our operating agreement and make sure that the city and the CRA are protected. But as co-developers, APD TESRA will make an assignment of development rights to a sub-development entity. And in this case, TESRA is responsible for element 8, and I'm gonna give an example of what we've put in place to demonstrate our ability to develop element 8. As I said earlier, we've brought together what we think is a great team that know the city, that have done development in Riviera Beach, that in our respective fields we're nationally recognized and leaders, and we're committed to the city and residents. So TESRA Partners, at the top of this pyramid, is owned by Mr. Saffold and I. Song & Associates that designed both this building and did the phase 1 elements of the marina is our architect. Municipal Acquisitions have provided the financing commitment for the parking, and I have a slide to deal with that. And Cornerstone Group have developed and managed over 15,000 housing units, is recognized nationally as one of the top 15 affordable multifamily developers. They developed Indian Trace and several other properties in Riviera Beach and Palm Beach County. And Allsite has teamed up with Cass Construction that has the bonding capacity for us to be able to do element 8. Clearly, the financing commitment regarding a mixed-use development, we break down into a couple of parts. The parking commitment from Municipal Acquisition, the residential tower, and I believe we're going to get into some discussion. We proposed it to be a workforce housing development. And we'll get into more discussion, but basically what that means is that the majority of the units are priced to be affordable to moderate income families. And there is a set aside of a percentage of units that's affordable to low income families. We know that the way we've done the income mix is that it does qualify for a tax credit program. Just this element alone deals with us getting questions 2, 3, 6, 8 particular questions, 9 questions that we've outlined in the matrix. So to negotiate element 8 will require us to converse with your staff and come to an agreement on questions 3, 4, 5, 7, 8, 12, 13, 14, and 15. Next slide. We were asked by your previous consultant to demonstrate that we have financing commitment. In our packet, when we submitted our RFP, we provided a commitment for up to $67 million to finance parking. Now, obviously, we probably don't want to start with 1,600 parking spaces at one time. The financing commitment does require, it is public financing. It would be a public-private partnership. It would require the city or the port, or potentially both, to master lease parking. Since the city is master leasing parking, it would set the rates. And so you could charge for parking, or you could have parking free. It obviously will require us to build the housing and mixed use units. We understand that the city has a lot of other things to do, and so its financing capacity to be tied up on parking is not prudent. And so we would sit down and show what our housing development on Element 8 alone would produce in the way of tax revenues. Then it's a decision between you as the CRA and you as City Council to determine how much of the tax revenues we generate that gets allocated to the city to cover its risk in parking. And so we've provided that formula so that the project TIF, the tax increment that's created. So think about it. At Spanish courts now, you receive no taxes on that property. And just from the residential development alone, we're talking $25 million worth of taxable property. All of that can be assigned to pay for the cost of parking. And so we expect that to be part of the negotiations. If you have questions, I believe Jeff Pacey from Municipal Acquisitions is online, and I can present questions to him. But that commitment letter that you see is in our packet. Next question. Next slide. We've had conversations with staff, and we know the vision, and we understand, and we accept it. We think we can work with the vision that staff has or presented to you, and maybe even some of the direction you want to give us tonight. So I think it's important for the 2 blocks that we're responsible to develop that we have principles for housing development. The number of units that are affordable to low-income families. How many units do we target for moderate and middle-income families? And so we try to meet the interests and demands for your vision for how this project should activate the rest of the Broadway corridor and some of the other things that you want to accomplish. This project should definitely be seen as a spark plug to your vision for the Broadway corridor. Whether we do market rate or workforce housing, I think it's good public policy that a certain number of units be set aside and be affordable for low-income families to demonstrate our commitment and your desire to make sure that this community is enjoyed by all, regardless of income levels. And the question is it best to go higher and do high rises, or do we go out to Avenue E and over to Blue Heron? I think that is an opportunity, and again, another policy discussion as to how should this project spark the demand that the housing may create, and whether or not it is a catalyst for the development along Avenue E. And so this was to be Von's slide. Is he currently on? Okay, Von, are you? I'm looking up with cyberspace. I'm looking up to the heavens.
Yeah, Tony, I'm here.
Okay, Von, if I'll advance the slide and you can talk through the next few.
Wonderful. Well, again, thank you everyone for your time. We really appreciate the ability to be here with you. And I also want to thank my partner for leading us in this discussion. In reference to the next phase of what we're proposing to do, the question does come up related to financial capacity and the ability to move forward with what we're proposing. So an example of what we're talking about is elements 0 and 1. 0 being the event center, and 1 being the first out parcel restaurant. So essentially, what we are looking to do is to facilitate some momentum for the project by being able to help fill vacant spaces and come up with a good tenant mix in the event center that also takes advantage of an ability to assist the existing tenants with expansion or stabilization, depending on what happens to be needed, and coming up with a complementary tenant that can fuel more activity, not just for the project, but for other existing businesses in the area. So an example of what we put in our original proposal and what we continue to put forward is we believe a great complementary tenant for the mix in the event center would be a Topgolf swing suites. I'm not sure if you all are familiar with the swing suites product. We've had the pleasure of working with Topgolf on another location in our Stonecrest mall development project. It's a great attraction. But what it also does for the marina project is it gives us a national credit tenant with a high profile brand name that will assist us in leasing other spaces and attracting other tenants to the site, but also sending an indication to general consumers of the level of quality that's available at the marina with the rest of the development. Now, the waterfront restaurant piece would be element number one. We believe that with the Topgolf implementation as an example, it would be easy to attract a restaurant for that site. And the reason that we're focused on elements 0 and 1 in particular is because until the parking solution is qualified, there isn't enough additional parking spaces to add more commercial space. Just as a leading indicator, the rest of our retail plan calls for between 50 and 80,000 square feet of retail. Our strategy is to make half of that destination retail and not just local retail, and the other half of that would be focused on local entrepreneurs and retail so that we can market and promote the essence of Riviera Beach. And the spirit of Riviera Beach is a part of what attracts people to come to the site. And so we propose to do that through a public market food hall type of concept, which would be anchored by some form of destination retail. In other similar projects, what we've done is for the destination retail, just to give you a sense of what we're talking about, it would be something similar to a round one, which are generally 35 to 50,000 square feet destination retail tenants. Round one is an amusement center similar to a Dave & Buster's, if you're familiar with that, or a Sequest, which is an aquarium. We recognize that you all have a Sequest now in South Florida, but when we began this project 3 years ago, Sequest's preferred site was going to be the Riviera Beach Marina because we have a working relationship with them. So that just gives you a essence of what our vision is, how we think we can evolve the site plan, how it can be complementary with the other aspects of what's there. And we hope that it continues to fit into your desires and expectations for the site. As you look there at the event center, you can see where having elements such as that would help activate the event center and attract people to the complement. As far as in retail development, we believe in not only the law of attraction, but the power of 10. And what that means is as we are successful in adding 10 elements to your particular site, what that does is it gives people not just a reason to come for a couple of hours in an afternoon, but ultimately a couple of days, because every 4 attractions that you put into a site gives people essentially a one-day visit to your location. Now, the next piece that we sincerely wanted to highlight is our capability, and we just wanted to share with you that we presented in our package several financing commitments. One of our financing commitments, which is with an existing relationship, they've worked with us on other projects. It's a group called Four Corners Global Lending. They're based in Lexington, Kentucky. They've approved this project for up to $25 million, specific to the retail commercial development. The only contingency on their commitment, and the letter is here in the PowerPoint, and it has been previously presented, is the development agreement. They just need to qualify what the terms are of the development agreement before they take the next steps in releasing any funds or furthering their commitment. It's issued jointly to APD and Urban Retail. You all have heard from Tony and also in our proposal, understanding our relationship with Urban Retail. And then ultimately, they're ready to be contacted and vetted, and they're prepared to present a proof of funds. So hopefully that will satisfy any questions about our financing capability and our ability to move forward. And then this last slide, if you've never been to a Topgolf Swing Suites, it's a very interactive location. It's a regional draw, similar to the larger Topgolfs. It's a festive location where groups of people can come together, and it has food and beverage components. And on the right-hand side, what you'll see there are the renderings for the Topgolf that we developed in Stonecrest, Georgia, and the development plans are below it. So we're happy to answer any questions and continue to work with staff to refine the vision. But we believe that something like the Topgolf, we can absolutely get done in 2021 so that we can show momentum while these other details of the project are being negotiated. And then the next slide.
And we, as Mr. Irons has highlighted, his responsibility in this, we know from past meetings that we've had with you and even conversations that we've been at this for 3 years. February would be the 3-year anniversary as to when the RFP was first referenced. And Mr. J. Evans in his memo highlighted all the key steps that we've went through just to get to this point. So we know from hearing from you that you want action and you wanted it yesterday. And so the final slide that we have is our proposal or request in order to activate the action we think you want and what we think we can do immediately. So obviously there has to be some legal agreement between us, and I've had conversations with Mr. Haygood, and we know previously that the agreement template that you had with Viking was not a typical master development agreement, but what it did do, it highlighted the expectations for development and when it could occur. And if it didn't occur at the pace that you wanted, you could give us notice. And if we weren't ready, then you could relieve us of our responsibilities and bring in whomever you want. And as you know, I was your CRA director at that time, and we did give Viking notice, and they subsequently resigned. So we feel, and to demonstrate our commitment, that we're willing to go under the same agreement. And based on the pace of our phases, if you feel that we are not working diligently to improving your property, then you could relieve us of that responsibility, and that's what this agreement says. And frankly, we provided the first draft, and we think, I shouldn't speak for your attorney, but possibly it could be back to you within 60 days. We're prepared. We think all the elements at Spanish Court's Element 8 are really defining. I think it'll define what we do about the land, whether we buy it, whether we lease it, how much of a parking garage do we build for the current marina, for future uses, for the residential. We'll sit down with your staff, and our first proposal is we would like the parking garage to be public. We expect to contribute revenues for the residential piece, and then obviously your staff would not make a recommendation to you to build a public garage if we haven't demonstrated that we're ready to go vertical with the housing, because you obviously need the tax revenues to pay for it. And so all that comes together. And that's what we say, if you authorize negotiations for Element 8, we think that we could be able to have a strong bona fide development agreement within 90 to 120 days. You heard Mr. Irons talk about the event center. We've heard you talk about wanting to get a restaurant sooner than later. We know Rafiki Tiki have talked about expansion. We think that the event center is one of those low-hanging fruit, and that with APD's capability, along with its partner APD, that they could clearly negotiate a commercial broker agreement and provide you a national strategy to secure a tenant. And you heard from Mr. Irons, who talked about Topgolf swing suites as one possibility of just a national tenant. The restaurant pad site A is, again, expansion of the event center. Even with this pandemic, most people are looking for outdoor restaurants. I know that I get tired of being home, and I'm always looking for a restaurant that's outdoors. And so we think that even in this pandemic environment, that the development of pad site A should be attractive. The issue, obviously, is your 50-year ground lease limit, and you can't sell the land. So there are economic issues to be resolved between us, because as investors, we can't say that this is a 99-year site control and base the economics on a 99-year plan. And so having a discussion about what the city's expectations are for developing the restaurant site is going to be replicated on the rest of the pads. And then in talking with staff and in hearing from some of you, we know that there is a vision to make this section of Riviera Beach great and to exceed expectations. And we want to be part of that. And we're prepared to collaborate on a vision to do just that. Whether we go up or out, I think that that can be determined by a planning study to determine how do we position our lifestyle community, if I use that term intentionally, with the other choices that your population have in areas immediately north, south, and west of us. And so if we get direction on those actions, we will be ready to roll up our sleeves and bring you something that is actionable and detailed that allow us to move forward together. Thank you for your time.
Madam Chair, if there's any questions on the presentation that was just provided by Mr. Brown, if not, we can get into the discussion on the questions that have been proffered.
Mr.
Madam Chair.
I'll come to you next. What are we, council, commission? Commissioner Linden, I'll come to you next. Commissioner McCoy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I want to go back to element 8. Mr. Brown, you spoke about, I think element 8 is the Spanish Court site. Is that correct? Yes.
Yes, sir.
One of the slides provides for 320 units. Is that all going to be contained in element 8? And the second part of the question is, how do you establish the valuation of, I wrote it down here somewhere, $25 million proposed assessment for property value?
So we've, and I'll maybe even ask Josh from Cornerstone to join me. We've done a pro forma for 135 units of development on that site, and I think the conceptual site plan from Song and Associates initially had 175. So between Cornerstone's experience and what they think they can do with tax credits, we have done a model for 135 units, and so what I've articulated, I think the $26 million, feel free, Josh, to come up, is the total cost of development.
What Tony said is pretty much sums it up pretty well. That is, would be the total cost. We sized the amount of units based on the amount of subsidy we believe we would be able to get from Florida Housing through their tax credits. And that's how we got our number.
It does not include the cost of parking. The general rule of thumb is that for every parking space costs about $25,000 a space. So a 100-space parking garage is $2.5 million. If we did, obviously, 500 parking spaces, you can play with the numbers. If I'm not mistaken, 1, 2, 3, 4. That is nearly $5 million. If I did that right, 5, 6, 7, $8 million to do parking if we did 500 spaces. And Joe, you can help me on that site. How many floors of parking do we have? And I believe in the diagram we showed you is illustrating, I believe, 800 parking spaces.
That's correct. It's just under 800 spaces in 5 levels of parking, and that's surrounded by the other uses wrapping around.
So 500 spaces would be $12,500,000 just for parking alone. And that would be just enough parking for special events at the event center. Pretty much the current demand that the city outlined, and not if we remove parking in a later phase, if we eliminated, for instance, if we went forward with the festival marketplace and the hotel, which we're showing as sites 5 and 6, I think that's going to eliminate about 400 parking spaces in the surface lot. So the question becomes, as we phase, right, what do we need in order to activate the waterfront for the restaurants? And then once we do future phases and we eliminate surface parking, we need to make up those spaces. So I imagine the conversation around parking with staff is going to be significant and very critical. Mr. McCoy, did I answer your question? I know I added some more elements to that answer.
Yes, actually you did. I was going to ask, obviously, if you're talking 500 spaces, 135 units, there's going to be a public parking component, which that's what you're proposing to be master leased by the city, or the CRA, I should say.
So and Jeff Pacey is online too. And if you can hear the question, if you want to say something, just holler.
I'm here. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we hear you fine. So Jeff Pacey is a principal with Municipal Acquisition. Mr. McCoy raised the question about parking, and I forget the second part of that question, Mr. McCoy. Was it related to the cost or the sufficiency?
Well, obviously, number 8 is going to have a public parking component, because that would seem only practical since you only have 135 units. And am I seeing something incorrect? Because, number 8 seems like, I don't know where the parking starts, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but it seems that we have 8 stories, and that stretches the length from Broadway all the way down to Avenue C, and that's only 135 units?
Correct. Yes, they range. Let me take this off. You can hear me better. They range from 1, 2, and 3 bedrooms, so there's a mix of unit sizes within there. And you can see that up above the parking level, up above the 5th floor, then you have units that front to the amenity deck as well as to the external sides of the site. And then there's units on the floors below wrapping the parking.
Follow up, Madam Chair.
Go ahead.
So, my question now goes back to the valuation. So, you suggested the concept of how we decide whether it's market rate versus affordable, or a combination thereof. Wouldn't that drive, I guess, not even your development cost, but the valuation in I guess, subsequent years?
And I'll have Cornerstone join me too. What will likely happen when we negotiate sort of the property taxes with the property appraisal is not so much the development costs, but we would show probably net operating income and put a cap rate to it. And so it's because we're using tax credits and the cost of development is being subsidized, in all likelihood, the valuation is going to be less than our development costs. and it's going to come from a net operating income capitalization rate that we would be negotiating as to what is the taxable value for the property. Anything you want to add?
Thank you. You.
Thank you. Commissioner Lanier, was that you earlier? Commissioner
Yes.
Lanier, you recognized?
The first question I ask, and this is for my colleagues, the first question I'm asking is, what do we do when we find, or when a consultant finds, that these developers are not financially capable of financing the deal that they're proposing? We still have not gotten to the part, we're having this workshop, and of course, I was against having this workshop because I wanted to find out one fundamental question, and that was the developers, were they financially capable of financing this project that they proposed? And we have not gotten that information. We have not had a consultant, a financial expert to justify that. So I'm just curious to know from the board, I mean, what do we do if the financial consultants deem that the developers cannot provide the financial wherewithal for the projects that are proposed? That's just one question. But I'm posing that to the board because I just really want to get some idea of how we're going to proceed, because we're talking as if this is a done deal, and we're talking as if the information presented by the developers in terms of financing is what we're going to rely on. And of course, we cannot do that. We have to rely on an outside entity, expert, to determine if the developers can finance and financially take care of the deal that they're proposing. So I just had to get some feedback from my colleagues, and that's just only one of the questions that I have. I have some other questions as well.
Madam Chair,
You recognized.
I'll take the lead on answering that question. Councilwoman Lanier, page 13 has a commitment letter from Municipal Acquisitions in regards to funding for this project. On page 18, there's a commitment letter from Four Corners Global. So if we need a financial consultant to read these letters to us, then we have an issue. See the commitment letters here. I don't really have much of an issue with those commitment letters.
Thank you.
I understand, Madam Chair, I understand that there are commitment letters from whomever. We are not financial experts, and I don't think that I need anyone to read me anything. But what I do need to happen is I need to be able to know that from a financial expert, that the proposal that is being presented to us, that the developers can finance this. And this was a question, and this was something that we went forward with. The board agreed that we needed a financial consultant, expert in this area to be able to assure the city, especially given the magnitude of this deal. You know, $300 million is 2 letters is not going to get it for me. We want to make sure we are not entering into this deal blind. So that is one of my questions. And no, I'm not going to be satisfied with 2 letters from someone who I don't know, and there has not been any background, and there has not been any due diligence by the CRA to make sure that this is the case. So that's that. And I understand if Mr. Evans can provide me some information as to the status of that financial consultant.
Mr. Evans.
Madam Chair, if I may.
Yes.
We have issued a solicitation that is due back on February 4th for expertise regarding P3 arrangements. That goes from legal services all the way to financial services. One of the things that I think is important for the discussion this evening and is contained in the question, that have been proffered is, does the board wish to see the financial capacities of the firm demonstrated per element? That is important to provide clarity to staff, because originally when the financial consultant was hired, they were looking at the totality of the project. And so anytime you look at a project that vast, that has a $200 million plus capital outlay, that is challenging for many firms, and there are many firms that, you know, probably a handful of them that have the ability and capabilities of coming forward with a $200 million particular project. As it relates to the financial consultants, once they are on board, they will review the elements that have been provided to the financial advisor in the past, but providing clarity as it relates to these questions allows for us to narrow the focus, so the financial consultant as well as our legal consultant can look at the nuances based on the direction that the board wants to go, and then provide you a sound recommendation. It is not staff's intention or anyone's intentions to bypass the financial consultants as well as the other expertise that's necessary to ensure that we enter into a contract that looks at risk mitigation. If you look at the discussion that we're having as it relates to the individual elements, please note that if you get into arrangements with the individual elements in mind, it does not preclude you from, if you don't like the arrangement based on subsequent phases, that you can, similar to how Mr. Brown articulated, sever the relationship. We are going to make sure, by virtue of any agreement that we get into with any developer, that we as the city and CRA have a contract that doesn't expose us to significant risk, and that we don't have a situation that puts us in a precarious situation. So those reviews and that analysis will all be completed before we get into a discussion as it relates to a contract that then allows for the activation of those particular areas. So we're not bypassing it, but we do need clarity from the board if you are willing to allow for each of the individual elements to be reviewed on their individual merits themselves, and then to move forward with negotiations on those particular elements. And I think, Mr. Brown, correct me if I'm wrong, that was the intent from the onset of the proposal, especially with the relationship with your development partner, that you're not a joint venture, you're co-developers, and that was contemplated in your submission and the review that you were thinking was going to occur.
Ms. Evans, you're absolutely correct. And I think I said in my presentation, and it's the fourth bullet on this slide, you're going to require us to demonstrate that we can go vertical. That's how you're going to pay for everything. And if we can't demonstrate to you that we're prepared to close and all the financing is in place, you don't approve it. And you relieve us. It's just that simple.
Madam Chair?
Are you finished, Commissioner Lanier?
No, I am not. But we're basically here negotiating now. We're negotiating these questions. We're negotiating what the original RFP stood for. You're saying that now we're going to look at each individual element of the proposal. This is a master development plan. When you say that there is only a couple of firms that could do this, then that's what we need. We need a firm that can afford to do this. So now we're looking at breaking all of this out. And if that would be the case, we might as well parcel it out and let other people get involved, other developers get involved in each of these pieces. The deal was that we were going to do a master development plan, which means that's what it means, master development. They would do it all. And now we're having negotiations about breaking it up into pieces. So that's one of the other questions. Another question that I had too was, when you guys talked about, meaning the developers, when they talked about these partners, I've never heard of these partners before tonight. You mentioned another financial partner, you mentioned an architect, you mentioned a developer. How is it that I've only heard of urban retail before tonight, and then I hear of different other people involved in this venture now as well? That's one question. Now, under this agreement, when you talk about co-developers, and it's no joint responsibility. So are you saying that this one team does not have anything to do with the other team? And so are you co-guaranteeing all elements, meaning if one doesn't complete a project, the other will? It's very confusing with that bifurcation, because now you're saying that each of you guys are responsible for different elements. So what happens if one part of it doesn't get finished? Do the other partner come in and do it, or does the city have to come in and do it? That has been my question, initially too, with this whole thing, is that, this whole bifurcation of a co-ownership, and I understand that, this was originally brought to the developers as a deal, as something that they could put together as a co-developer. But my question is, what happens if one entity does not fulfill their part of the bargain? So that's another concern that I have. So that means that, it's very risky for the CRA to be put in a position where if one a part of the co-development team does not carry out their responsibility, then who is responsible for that? I also have a couple of other questions, and but I will wait, because I have a list of questions I've written because of this presentation that has been presented to us. I'll wait until the next phase of whatever is happening here with the next presentation, but I do have several additional questions.
Mr. Evans, did you want to respond to any of that? I'm
Certainly,
thinking.
Madam Chair. With regards to the master developer,
I would like the developers to respond to the questions that I asked. It's for them.
Oh, okay, Mr. Brown.
Apologize, Ms. Lanier, I wasn't sure to whom your question was posed. Mr. Haygood has a copy of our operating agreement, and it outlines the conditions with which one developer will step in. And we've been as transparent as we can be. And if those terms are not protective to the city, we expect that we would see some proposed changes in the language to ensure that the city safeguards are in place. Operating agreement also anticipates that even the assignment of the development rights require concurrence from the city and the CRA. So you have the belts and suspenders to ensure that your interest is protected.
So what about the people that you brought, you're talking about tonight, which I know I haven't heard of it. I'm not sure this board has ever heard of any of these individuals that you brought to the table.
If you're referring to urban retail, APD in their proposal originally talked about their partnership with urban retail. That is not new. In our proposal,
no, that was the only one that wasn't new to me, was urban retail, because I heard them before. I just wanted to know about the developer, the financier, the architect, because it seems as if these are some of the people that the CRA could have solicited.
All of those entities, Madam Chair, members of the board, all of those entities were in our original proposal.
No, they were not, sir.
Exception was Cornerstone. Uptown Rentals was our residential apartment when we were going to do market rate. They do not specialize in affordable housing or workforce housing, so we replaced them with Cornerstone. But everyone else is in our original proposal.
Well, I'm going to disagree with that, because I read the original proposal and it wasn't there. But we can go ahead and go to the next phase, because I do have several other questions. And let me be clear here. I'm not trying to get into a combative or a back and forth with the developers. I just want my questions answered, and for you to say something like, transparency. I'm not I'm not trying to attack anybody here. I'm here to ask questions because I have been entrusted with the taxpayers' dollars and been elected to be able to make decisions about the money that they pay in taxes. So I'm not here to try and attack, or I'm not here to try and go back and forth. I just want my questions answered, and I want to be able to move forward in my thinking about this whole deal. And I still have some issues with the fact that now we're talking about different elements being looked at instead of a whole development deal, master development plan that was originally in the RFP. But proceed.
Mr. Lawson, you have
Tony, this
Thank you,
is
Madam.
Jeff Pacey. Could I make a quick comment?
please do.
Yes, this is Jeff Pacey with Municipal Acquisitions, and you have a copy of our commitment letter. Just as an investor, we have a $450 million portfolio. Our top 10 investors are typically life companies, mutual funds, insurance companies, pension funds, et cetera. I'll give you a quick sample. Bank of America, Nuveen Asset Management, Sun Life, Vanguard Group, JP Morgan Asset Management, Fidelity Investments, National Guardian, Navy Mutual. Those are about 8 of our top investors. We have virtually an unlimited access to capital. We have a very unique focus where we only invest in state and local municipal projects, colleges and universities, and nonprofit health systems. So if you haven't heard of us, we're not a name brand organization to everyone. I just wanted to provide a little bit of backdrop to our company
sir,
and what
that's fine, sir. The issue here is that we have will enter into an agreement with a financial consultant and expert, and you're talking about your company, and of course you're going to say, you know, what you need to say for your company. It could be true. That I don't know that. I don't know you. I don't know any of the players here in terms of financial capability. That is the reason why we hire experts. We want to be clear. We want to be sure that the agreement that we are entering into has been vetted. And I have no doubt that, you know, your company is who you say it is. We just need to make sure that we have the people who are going to be involved in this endeavor have been vetted and have the financial capabilities to be able to do the proposed project.
Thank
And
you.
then two, I don't, why weren't you here previously and all the other meetings before?
I'm sorry, say that. I missed that, Commissioner Lanier.
I was asking the gentleman who just talked that, you know, we've been talking about financing for the longest, and I hadn't heard from, were you just retained by this company? I don't know, because, you know, we've been talking about financing. The last consultant that we had, you know, we didn't get any information in regards to this particular entity. So I was wondering why tonight he's here, and you know, I've just never heard from you before. That's all I'm saying. And the fact that these commitment letters must be reviewed by our consultants before we proceed with anything. But you can go ahead.
I do have a question to piggyback on yours, Commissioner Lanier. Mr. Evans, the Jonathan version. Do we have a history with municipal acquisitions, or does the CRA have a history?
We haven't entered into any situation or relationship with municipal acquisition, whether on the city or the CRA side, but they are, like the gentleman stated, they are, their bread and butter is municipal activities, college, university. They are very prominent in the state and in the nation for these types of projects. So it's a known commodity, and when you look at situations whereby public infrastructure is looking for financing, most times they are one of the entities that are involved.
And were they in the original proposal?
I believe the initial packet that was submitted for review by Dr. Fishkind did contain information from municipal acquisition, as well as there was correspondence that was circulating, I think, early on about their involvement.
And if we decided as a commission to look individually at segments of this project, and if we were to look at the parking in this particular segment, we would just be looking at municipal acquisition's ability to provide the financing, right?
Correct, Madam Chair. You would be looking at specifically what element that we would look to move forward with on. So
Okay.
whatever that relationship would be, if the board says that you want us to look at each element, if they stand alone, that would be where municipal acquisition would provide the information for the purposes of the financial review. One of the things also I do want to state, Madam Chair, is that you can still have a master developer and allow for phasing of the project. It's not uncommon for those types of things. And one of the items that I think is germane to the discussion that the board's having this evening is you're going to have a profoundly different relationship for the projects that are on the east side of Avenue C, because you have the stipulation with regards to the lease of that property. You have restrictions that say you cannot lease anything for over a term of 50 years. So the properties that are on the west side of Avenue C can be handled profoundly differently. So you're going to have different agreements just by nature of the mixture of the properties and the stipulations that are communicated in the charter.
Thank you. In your opinion, given your expertise and background in this kind of project, is it safer for the city to divide this up so that we can take a look at the first phase, if you will? I don't want to confuse us with phase 1 and phase 2 of the whole marina project, but you know what I'm saying. Is it safer for the city to divide it up into segments so that we can know that one segment is done and done well before we move on to the next? Would that be your opinion?
From my perspective, and from what I've had conversations with my colleagues about in the field, is that it's not uncommon for these types of arrangements where it is looked at element by element. Also, it does provide a situation that reduces your risk from the standpoint if the developer is incapable of moving forward, completing the one element that has been negotiated, you would not enter into relationship for subsequent phases. So it does provide you an opportunity to say to the developer, by virtue of the contract, show us what you're capable of, and if you're capable and successfully deliver on this project, then it opens the opportunity for subsequent elements in the overall project. The other side of it is it provides the board an opportunity to renegotiate as you look to add additional phases. For instance, if we were looking at the Ocean Walk right now, and that was another phase, and we knew that the first arrangement was a lease payment of $65,000 annually, I bet that this board would say subsequent phases would be 8 or 10 times that amount. So that provides you opportunities to say, I want to renegotiate the agreement. I want to add different elements contained in that. So it gives you opportunities to go back to the negotiation table. As if you negotiated all of it at once, it is what it is, and then you have a situation that we find ourselves in with the Ocean Walk. There's no opportunities to go back to the table unless additional elements are provided in that particular project. So that is a real example of the opportunities that you do have if you look to have element by element. Plus, it allows for what this board has communicated very clearly to get shovels in the ground. It allows for you to move a lot quicker to move the project forward if that's the desires of the board.
Thank you. And I have a question for Mr. Haygood. Is it entirely ironclad that in this contract that we would enter into, that we could terminate our agreement with the developers if we're unsatisfied with the phase that they've entered into?
Well, yes. Although we actually have not gotten to the point of drafting the agreement, but the intent would be that the CRA would have the opportunity, if in fact the developer did not meet the terms of the agreement, both as far as timing on developing or being able to show for another phase, then that the agreement could be terminated. Okay. Now, the devil's in the details.
Sure.
when we get into default provisions and so forth. But yes, that was the concept that we're moving forward with.
Okay, thank you. Did you have questions?
Madam Chair,
Yeah,
I
you-
just want to request if someone can email me the PowerPoint slides that Mr. Brown had. I don't have
Oh,
all of
sorry.
those at all.
I'll do that right now, or maybe we can,
Thank
could you email the presentation too? Thank you. I'll take care of that. Oh, sorry,
Madam Chair.
it's off and it's still ringing. Sorry. Yes, you're recognized, sorry.
Madam Chair?
Yes,
Oh,
I was
yes,
gonna ask you, I was gonna ask about the.
Commissioner Lanier, could we hear from Commissioner Lawson first, and then I'll come back to you? He hasn't had an opportunity to speak. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Brown, you stated that the income level is for moderate income families for the housing development, which is going to be workforce housing. Do you know what the estimated income level is at that moderate income currently?
I'll ask Josh to help me, but typically it's at 80% of area median income.
Rough
He's shaking
estimate of
his
what
head.
that is now?
80%. So Palm Beach County's median family income, if I'm not mistaken, is a little under $69,000. And so if you take 80% of that, $54,000 is the household income that we're targeting. And then typically HUD formula indicates that a person's income at 30% of that is what's affordable. This is what's affordable to rent. And I don't know, Josh, if you have the range of apartment rents that we had projected in the pro forma. I'm putting you.
And Madam Chair, Ms. Jenkins does have all that information once we get into the housing element
Okay.
as part of the presentation.
Thank you.
Just wanted to say that the area median income in Palm Beach, I think, is about 80,000, 79,000 and change. So that actually lets us get up to, what's that, 65,000-ish?
Okay, thank you. And I believe Mr. Evans stated that when we get into the housing aspect that Ms. Anita Jenkins will be giving us that information. So we'll delve into that a little deeper. Mr. Evans, you talked about phasing. Do we ever phase our projects? I know you had mentioned that it is a recommendation and a possibility, but have we done that before?
Yes, Councilman.
Okay, so we have phased our projects in the past. And in this proposal that was presented, there is 50,000 to 80,000 square feet of retail and restaurant. In the current market and economy, what we've seen is there's been a shift in regards to square footage of space, retail. So wouldn't it be in our best interest to phase this project based upon the transition and change with the economy and the community over the next 3, 5, 10 years?
Councilman or Commissioner, I do agree. I think because of the nature of the market and as well as the pandemic, it allows for you to mitigate risk and exposure as you move phases. We know that housing is a great demand. Your retail component, how that comes back and what that looks like is something that certainly is going to take a little bit of time and research, as there's significant risk as it relates to the retail component. But to answer your question directly, yes, it would provide another opportunity for us to in essence, slow roll this to make sure we don't have empty suites or empty retail space because we overdevelop the area.
And a follow-up with Mr. Haygood, you said that we were able to sever ties. We are able to sever ties with the development team at any time if we did decide to phase this project, as long as it's outlined within the agreement, correct?
That's the intent. It would be, number one, and obviously be negotiated. When in fact we would expect him to start the next phase, if in fact the next phase they were not prepared to move forward, we would then be able to terminate the agreement. Now again, terminate all the agreement, terminate the agreement on that particular phase. So all that's going to be subject to negotiations.
Okay.
And then if you weren't pleased with his performance on a phase that you agreed to, you would have the right to terminate.
Gotcha. Also, either Mr. Evans, in the original agreement, I believe for transparency and clarity's sake, there was a statement made by my colleague, Councilwoman Lanier, in regards to these partners that were outlined in the agreement. Mr. Brown stated that the only partner that was added was Cornerstone, Were all of these other partners originally in the proposal that was submitted to the previous consultant and previously submitted?
Councilman, I would have Scott Evans address that.
Yes, I believe, I think it was referencing municipal acquisitions, and they were in the original proposal.
Well, Councilwoman Lanier's concern was page 11 of the individuals that Mr. Brown outlined. So we're trying to have some clarity of these individuals, of if they were a part of the proposal, because I want clarity and transparency with every step of this to see who was actually added to this and at what time frame, because I think that's Councilwoman Lanier's concern with the additions of individuals, which are typically part of a negotiation, but I just don't want any missteps or misstatements by anyone.
The only other one would be Cast Construction. I'm not sure if they were in the original.
Okay, and I believe Mr. Brown did state that that was recently secured. So, Mr. Brown, you stated that Cornerstone was the only one, but also Cast Construction as well.
No, Cast was in our original proposal as well. Cast was in our original proposal.
So that's conflicting. Mr. Evans, Scott Evans, was Cast originally in the proposal or not?
It's been some time since I looked at that original proposal from 2018.
Yeah, we, as our construction managers that we proposed at the time, with All-Site leading the charge, was Cast Construction and White's Construction, or White's contractor. And have since settled in on Cast. If you look around the city, if you see most multifamily high-rises, you see a Cast sign. And so we felt that Cast had a deeper portfolio as it related to multifamily properties than White's, but they both were in the proposal. We substituted Uptown Rentals with Cornerstone in that our first product was going to involve low-income housing tax credits. And Uptown Rentals, they do market rate development.
Thank you for the explanation. I'm very familiar with actually all of these partners, so thank you, Mr. Brown. I guess the last question was in reference and related to the parking garage. Mr. Brown, what exactly are you asking the city in reference to this current proposal for parking and the city's involvement for parking?
And I don't want to pretend to try to negotiate publicly, but in the information that we were asked to submit, we would negotiate the parking, at least the first garage, be a public parking garage, so we could take advantage of municipal acquisitions financing, and that we proposed a number of consultants that the city may consider. I know in the past the city has used Desmond Parking to do a parking pro forma. The CRA has used, remind me, Scott, a Walker Parking. And so I think from municipal acquisitions standpoint, they're looking at the strong AAA credit rating of your city as their creditworthy tenant. Knowing Mr. Sherman as well as I do, he's going to want to make sure that as a developer that we have the resources that are coming that will cover the lease payment so that your taxpayers do not. And so we've recommended in a more deeper proposal that we look to hire one of the city's 2 parking consultants to confer on the amount of parking revenue that can be developed based on rates and terms that the city may outline. And then in the question that Mr. McCoy asked, we should determine what is the minimum value of this property that's going to generate tax revenue. And then I think we're back into the number of parking spaces that we should do that would be reasonable.
Final question, Mr. Brown and Mr. Evans. Given approval by the board to move forward, and if we do phase this project out, will we be able to have shovels in the ground within the next 6 months?
I think realistically, our goal would be to have a shovel in the ground at least this time next year. We don't control your permitting process, but
I'd be delayed to get to that part.
Yeah,
Why would it take a year if we gave approval today?
Yeah, I think our goal is, I had a slide up earlier that talked about the timeline. If you assume that we go through a period of up to 90 days to negotiate, what page is that, Dr. Patel?
21?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, 21?
Actually, I think it's the last slide or second last slide. Yeah. So obviously we have to have time to negotiate with staff, and then staff will need to package it and present it to you. So we put a 90 to 120 day time frame on the negotiating process. Using Spanish courts as an example, if it's important for us to get tax credits to do the project, one of the things that we need to do in this 90 to 120-day period is to negotiate the terms by which we're either going to lease Spanish courts or purchase it. We will not score with Florida Housing Finance Corporation if we can't demonstrate site control. And we expect that the next round of tax credits for low-income housing tax credits will be spring or summer. So we're motivated on Spanish courts to at least negotiate leasing or purchase terms so that we can demonstrate site control. Then after that, it's just a matter of shoring up our financing commitments after we know specifically what the city's expectations are for rental income and other guarantees.
I guess that's my concern, Mr. Brown.
Tony?
Serving on the dais for 19 months and having the same discussions over and over and over. We literally either need to see shovels on the ground or figure a different approach. And to negotiate for the next 90 days, to discuss this again, to go back and forth for another 90 to 120 days. I'm familiar with the proposals here. I understand commitment letters. I understand financing. It's not going to take long for us to come to an agreement as a dais to get something moving. We as a council have to make a determination, and based upon the recommendations that I've heard tonight, even with Mr. Evans with phasing this project, we can have phase one started. And if it's going to take us a year to get shovels in the ground, I think we need to expedite that timeline just to show that we have the commitment from your organization and our organization to get it done. It's like I'm wasting my time up here. And unfortunately, we didn't come here to just kind of play around with discussions and constant conversation. Going back and forth, hiring consultants, having these discussions. This is a product that's going to impact our grandkids, yes, but we also want to make the decisions and move forward with our city. As a kid, Mr. Brown, listen, as a kid, the community looks the exact same from when I was growing up. It's actually a little bit less than, because I had certain things that are not here in this community right now. I don't want to die without having those same opportunities for social engagement in my community, with housing opportunities for residents to be able to fly into the community and people to be able to live here, without development, without displacement for our seniors in this community. So right now we keep talking, and I'm tired of the discussions because I'm wasting another 2 hours having the same discussion I had 18 months ago. So Mr. Brown, we need a solution today. We need an option today. Mr. Evans, the same thing for you, sir. We have to find a solution that's going to work together amicably for both parties to move forward. Otherwise, we cut ties and we continue to find another process that's going to get it done. And
Mr. Lawson, I think I can commit to you, and Mr. Irons is on the phone, and he'll commit as well. We will commit to you that we will not be the impediment to delay. The one critical element in the construction process that we do not control is your permitting process. Mm-hmm. And what we're hearing from other developers is that it is not expedited.
And that's actually part of why I spoke with Mr. Evans and the council, that I will be assisting with the expedited permitting process. I'm actually the chair for that department. So I'm working with our development services director on providing that process. So the minute that we have this negotiated, we will hopefully have a virtual, seamless process for you to go through. So that's not another excuse that I want to hear, because I'm working on that personally. So Mr. Brown and Mr. Evans, we need to get this done. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Madam Chair, if I may.
Yes, sir.
I think it's also important that if the purpose for this workshop is because invariably if we did not have this discussion in this forum, we would still continue going back and forth with email correspondence related to this particular project. This gives us the opportunity to get the directives and the perspective from the board immediately, so then we can move into subsequent phases. The other side of it is, and I think Mr. Brown and his partner can communicate, is that the retail component can come online a lot faster than the residential element. And if certainly if you all or if Mr. Irons can speak to that, in the event that we move into subsequent phases, how quickly and swiftly can the retail component come online to see some activity and some synergy that we're looking to see on the site?
Mr. Irons, did you hear the question?
Absolutely. Can you hear me? Yes. Can you?
Yes.
Yes, we hear you well.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
So absolutely, agree comments, something to share. One of the things I wanted to jump in to share is that we believe that we still have retail and entertainment tenants that are very interested in your site, which is why we keep underscoring destination retail and why we continue to bring up Topgolf, because we believe that that is an imminent opportunity. So the goal would be, while these negotiations are happening and while permitting and things of that nature are being conducted, we would move forward by showing momentum on the site, by activating your event center and getting your pad site A, which is element number 1, undergoing, so that we can then show that there's some new activity to the site and create a new draw. We believe that would be viewed positively, not only from a perception standpoint by the residents and the visitors to the site, but economically, because it would make the event center more economically feasible by the rents being paid by new tenants. And we also fill additional spaces beyond just, we use Topgolf as a representation, but we do have a handful of others that have been at the table for more than a year, interested in coming to your site.
And
Madam Chair?
I guess that follow.
Commissioner Lawson is following up. Keep one.
It was just a follow-up to Mr. Irons. Thank you, Mr. Irons, for that information. And I believe one of the biggest issues or concerns that Mr. Brown, yourself, and Mr. Evans has always stated is that we have to focus on the parking. We currently can't even address the influx of residents currently with the lack of parking we have there. So that has to be the first step that we discuss in a cohesive working unit with the restaurant pad, with the potential of the Topgolf and the housing. So I know parking, I do not want that to be the issue that holds up the progress of this project. So working out a creative means of getting the parking done through Mr. Brown and Mr. Evans in the city through negotiations. I think, colleagues, parking has to be the initial focus. Parking, housing, and we can definitely focus on the restaurant pads, because if we spur additional retail and restaurants and activity there, there's nowhere for our residents or for our tourists to park. So if we don't actually have the parking and focus on that as the first and foremost step, then we're not going to be able to spark any growth over there. So why I think Mr. Brown has constantly discussed the parking, and I appreciate Mr. Evans pushing back on us not paying for it, has been the fact that that is the priority. So instead of us pushing back, or instead of us not coming to a solution or amicable solution, I believe that's one of Mr. Evans' questions for the night that we need to address as a dais. Are we as a city going to pay for parking so that we can get the structure put up immediately? Or are we going to allow for this to delay the process? Or are we going to require our developers to put it up themselves? That's part of the discussion I believe we have to have tonight. And then that will address what Mr. Irons stated this afternoon in reference to the restaurant pads and the Topgolf and the housing that we want to add.
Madam Chair, if I may.
Yes.
I just need the
Mr. Evans has the floor. I'll call on you as soon as he's finished.
I just need the PowerPoint while I'm trying to have these discussions.
I'm sorry,
I want to
Kashana.
be able to refer to it.
Did we get that to Commissioner Miller?
No, they haven't.
I'm trying to send it.
She's going to try again. I'm sorry.
With regards to the parking, that's obviously part of the negotiation process, and you know there is going to be efforts on staff's part to work out an agreement. We don't need to necessarily get into the specificities because we want to negotiate those. But the great thing about any of those arrangements that municipal acquisition has done is that that's all public record, and we can see what those arrangements look like, and that can shore up and that can speed up the process as it relates to the arrangement related to parking. The other side of it is parking goes up very quickly and you can utilize it very quickly. If we are able to move forward with the permitting process, you can build parking that can be utilized 5 and 6 months after while continued vertical construction occurs. There's been projects I've been involved with where we've activated and allowed for parking to be utilized in a parking garage while there is still structural construction that's occurring on top of the parking. So there is ways to allow for things to happen concurrently to be able to accommodate the demand if we see more activities associated with this particular project. And then obviously we would have conversations with the port because there is discussions about the cruise entity coming back, coming with one ship, and then we know that there is a good number of folks that end up visiting our community. So there is opportunities for revenue generation and to be able to get that parking garage up sooner rather than later.
Thank you. Commissioner Miller Anderson, did you get that PowerPoint?
I tried to forward from my phone that I sent to Scott, but it wouldn't allow the attachment, so I don't.
No, I don't have it, but I think Scott just texted me.
PowerPoint. Yeah. Thank you.
I just want to add to what Mr. Jonathan Evans said about parking and the passion from Mr. Lawson. The one thing that is significant to bring out of municipal acquisitions term sheet is that they're allowing for 100% financing. And so once we sit down with the city and the issue is, I don't expect the city to pay for parking. They will, if they accept municipal acquisitions proposal, they will be liable for parking. Obviously, the exercise is between parking revenues and going vertical with the housing. What is the comfort level that the city want to see that there is enough revenue being generated that it protects them from the parking liability? And I think that's the exercise that we'll go through. And so I just wanted to clarify that and affirm that Mr. Jonathan Evans is correct. We can expedite the design of parking, but the other critical part is that the residential is going on top of the parking deck. And so, though we don't have to do them simultaneously, that the construction and the design of it has to be coordinated so that we know that the parking deck, once it's delivered, that then Tesra and Cornerstone are ready to go vertical with the housing. But you're correct, we can expedite the parking and the discussion of the terms to get your feedback.
Thank you. Anything else, Mr. Wilson? Commissioner Lanier, did you have other questions or comments?
I did. I wanted to ask, I really think that if you're going to do this, parking should be done concurrently with housing and retail and not just public parking alone. But to speak to Commissioner Lawson's passion about moving forward and moving forward quickly, I can understand that. Several months ago, when we talked about, of course, you know, on this project, I have been the lone vote not agreeing with how this is progressing. And one of the reasons was because people were dragging their feet because we didn't have any financial documents to know that the project was going to be financially feasible for what was proposed. Some of the other issues included, it's been 3 years, things are changing from the original RFP. I said 3-4 months ago that we should look at having these in elements, but not just with one contractor. I think that it would be safer for the city to do this in elements, to do this in phases, but with different solicitations. It protects the city and it opens up the opportunity for other developers to be involved with this process. To have a master developer and to have to negotiate a deal, even in phases, number one, it has got us, potentially 4 years without nothing happening. If we were able to go back to the drawing board, these same elements that we're having conversations about, have open solicitation for these elements, we can get shovels in the ground in 6 months. That is because we have opened this up to other developers, other solicitations, so that we can move forward, because then we don't have to rely on this piece is going to push this piece, and we got to do this to be able to get TIF dollars to be able to finance this. We can have other developers and other solicitations to open this up, and we can move forward all at one time with different solicitations. So I don't have a aversion, or I don't not like the project. I just don't like the fact of how it's been moving. And for the last 3+ years, it has not moved anywhere. And that is because we're negotiating with a sole developer when we can just open this thing up, let other developers have an opportunity to solicit with these different elements. And we can do it. We can do this quickly. Because if this is what we're wanting, if we want to move forward quickly, nothing has happened. Nothing hasn't happened here in the city. There is no shovels in the ground. And we're potentially looking at a whole nother year before we even get to that phase. But we can change that. We can look at opening up solicitation so that all of these different elements can be competed for and completed at the same time, different intervals, different developers, and we can get this done quickly. Because the way that this is going, it won't be next year, it'll be the year after. Because of all of the issues that have plagued this project from day one. This project has been plagued. We have been sitting here. This is, I don't know, the umpteenth meeting that we've had in regards to these same exact issues. And if we're going to move forward, we have to be bold in doing that. We have to not say that if we, I think it could be a situation where the board is saying, well, we started out with this and we should finish out with this. We don't have to. We can move forward boldly, put these solicitations out and start this phase and start these elements moving. And that is one way that we can do that. And it can happen very quickly. So I do agree, Mr. Lawson, with your passion in terms of having this to move forward quickly and having different ideas on how to do that. And that is one way in that we can do that. The city of Delray has moved forward with the food and market, and they have moved forward at lightning speed. So we are not any different from any other city. We have the same capabilities. We have the same intelligence. We have the same will and passion to move this project forward, but it may not go forward in its current form because look, it's been 3 years and potentially a fourth. So what does that mean? That means that currently the way that it is set up is not working for us. And we keep going down the same road. We need to sit here and figure out how we're going to put this out with different solicitation to get this project moving, because it has been proven. This is just not Shirley talking. This is 3 years talking that this project has gone nowhere. So we want to do something about it, then we need to think boldly and act quickly to be able to do it. That's my comments for now.
Thank you. Mayor Felder, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Evans, he's here. This group that's here tonight, has it always been a 4-1 vote?
I don't know if it's always been a 4-1 vote. As
At least a 3-2?
There's always been consensus or direction from the board and an affirmative vote to move forward.
So what I'm hearing tonight, or I've been hearing, is if we're going to move forward, as both Commissioner Lawson and Commissioner Lanier states, what's holding up to make the decision if it's going to be a 3-2 or 4-1 every time we come back? If that doesn't change, what's prolonging us from putting it on the table for a vote?
And that's what got us to this point. We as staff can only take it so far, and the developers as well. And so we need clarity from the board on these items, so then we can know which areas the board wishes to have us complete and focus on, and then move into subsequent phases. And so, from my opinion, and in conversations with the developer, and they can provide some insight, I think this is the most critical discussion, and probably discussion that should have happened a long time ago, to get to a point today where we can find where there's common grounds, where there's some additional information, and then this is in essence the spark that can allow for us to move into subsequent phases. Because if not, it then allows for a situation whereby staff has to provide what we believe the board's intent is, and that just becomes a slippery slope, and then adds for meeting and clarity and discussion after discussion, versus a situation where we have 16 questions, and if the board says yes, no, or indifferent, we know exactly where you stand, so then we can move to whatever the next phase of the process is.
Okay, so in essence, the board can make a decision to say, let's go ahead and phase it out. How can that decision be made tonight, or does it have to be another meeting?
Our intent, Mr. Mayor, is that the board make that decision this evening, because the financial review and the reviews and the work that the consultants will work on will be predicated on the items and the questions and the actions that the board takes tonight. So if the board says, phase the project, we want the financial capabilities to be looking at each phase exclusively, then that would be the scope of work that we will define for the individual that will be, or the firm that will be looking at the financial capabilities. So the more clarity and direction the board provides us this evening, the faster we can move through the process.
So now it's on the board. And one of my concerns is, meeting with somebody from the economic board, one of the things that Riviera Beach is facing is developers don't want to come to Riviera Beach. I think we have a chance to change that narrative, but piggybacking on Commissioner Lawson is, do we have to spend another 2 or 3 hours discussing this? Because I know some board members would just say, let's put it out for a vote and let it go. Is that something that could be done, or do we need to go through this whole presentation? And my concern is we still don't come up with any kind of answer tonight.
Mr. Mayor, based on the comments that the board has shared this evening, there are certain questions that you've already addressed. So there may be a handful, maybe half a dozen of the questions that still need some additional clarity. But some of the items that were intended to get addressed tonight by virtue of the conversation seems to be that the board can come to a amicable resolution on some of those items pretty quickly.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Chair,
Commissioner Miller Anderson, did you want to comment?
that was Commissioner Lanier.
Okay, but
Lanier can go-
excuse
she
me,
can go,
Commissioner
and then I'll
Miller
go
Anderson
behind.
hasn't commented yet. I just wondered if she was waiting to get the presentation, or if she wanted to make a comment now.
We still have more information to be presented, correct? Didn't I hear something about Ms. Anita Jenkins was speaking as well?
Yes. Shall we
Yeah,
hear
I would like to hear everything.
Okay.
and be able to
Mr.
talk about it
Evans?
afterwards. I have the PowerPoint now.
Okay. Mr. Evans, do we have another presentation?
We do, Madam Chair.
Yes, I have not stopped. I'd like to ask one more question, please.
Okay, Commissioner Lanier, you're recognized.
I mean, I think this is the purpose of a workshop, is it not, to be able to
Absolutely.
have this free-flowing conversation about where we need to go, how we need to get there? And just like I said before, we have an opportunity here tonight. We can provide Telsra with one of the elements, the other elements that we can put out, and we can start this ball rolling. We don't have to wait and negotiate all these parts with one developer. We can provide them with one element, we go out for the rest of them, and we can start doing these things simultaneously right away. And I see that is not the only way forward, but the quickest way forward. I think that we can all agree that we are like fed up with all of these meetings in regards to, we're sloshing through these development deals. We're sloshing through what this means. I mean, it's just it's overwhelming at this point. People who look at these meetings say, what are they doing? So we need to decide that we're going to move forward, and we're going to move forward quickly and boldly, which means that we provide TESRA with an element, and the rest of the elements, we start looking for developers to be able to come in and do this work and get this phase 2 of the marina done. And I believe we can do that. And as I said before, my reservations with this has been because having this master development plan, having this whole big plan, and having to go back and forth and figure out, can they do this part? Can they do this part? We're going to do it in elements. We're going to do it in this pieces. Just give them a piece, give the rest of it out, and let us move on. It's just that easy. I mean, when I said before about the city of Delray, they started last year and they're almost finished. We can do the same thing. So I just think that we need to make some decisions. We can move forward. And I like Commissioner Miller Anderson. I would like to hear the rest of the presentation so I can know that we're going in the right direction and we have the right information. But I believe that the only way forward for us to do is to provide a portion of this development deal to TESRA and move forward with the rest of it and have solicitations and get this work done.
Is that it?
Yes, that
Thank
is
you.
it.
Mr. Evans, could we have the next presentation, please?
Yes, Madam Chair. This next part of the presentation is the presentation that we spoke of that has the questions that have been posed by the developer and has been reviewed by staff. And so as each of these questions are before you this evening, there's some questions that you have spoken about and spoken to, and so there's some additional components that we may need some additional clarity so we can move through the process. So without further ado, we'll get into the question, and selected staff persons have been tasked with the responsibility of leading the discussion as it relates to that. The first question, do the co-developers have demonstrated financial capacity to develop what is proposed? I think before I get into my comments, I think it's important for Mr. Brown, if you can speak to the intent behind that particular element, and then I can share some of the comments that we had at the staff level with regards to it.
The short answer from our standpoint is yes, absolutely. Our package included over $92 million worth of financing commitment. We have to finalize our discussion on the housing type that you want. That will finalize our housing plan. And we're ready to go. The question was, how soon can we put a shovel in the ground? I mean, if you define that as a project that has been properly designed and permitted, I don't know any developer that can do that in 6 months. So, yes, we can demonstrate the financing commitment, and any and everything that you do and agree to do, you should predicate it on our ability to demonstrate that we could finance it.
And Madam
Tony, I'd like to also concur with you, since there are actually 2 developers here collaborating on your project. The APD team collaborating with TESRA not only has the financing capacity, but we've presented the ability to finance the entirety of the retail component. Not only did we provide a financing commitment letter, but our financial investor partner is willing to not only verify their commitment letter, but provide a proof of funds. That information has been provided to your previous consultant on more than 3 occasions. They just didn't reach out to verify. So we don't have any concern about whether or not you're going to find that our financing is in place and ready to go.
Madam Chair, to speak on that from staff's perspective, that's why it is so important that the board provide direction as to how they would like to see this overall project reviewed. Do you want it to be looked at in its entirety, or is the board willing to look at this based on each of the individual elements? With regards to the agreements and documents that would accompany this, obviously, we're going to look to mitigate any risks to the CRA in the city, and that we will negotiate from a point of strength, if at all possible, in every element associated with this particular endeavor. Nonetheless, it is a partnership. There is going to be give and take. It is not uncommon for these types of situations to see a project looked at element by element. You can structure an agreement, as was stated, that provides for outs in the event that the product that the board is looking to deliver is not acceptable, and then move into subsequent solicitations or relationships with other parties to develop the other phases of this particular project. From staff's perspective, either way provides for an opportunity for the project to move forward, but I can tell you, if you're looking at it in its entirety, that is going to be something that will take a extensive amount of time, more research, more discussions, and more conversations. If you do look at it element by element, it allows for us to have laser focus on that specific element. It allows for us to work through some of those pinch points and be able to bring you agreements that finalize the relationship to allow for vertical construction to commence. So from staff's point of view, it is a policy decision, but if you wanted to look at a conservative approach, the approach would be to look at it based on element by element. It allows for you to move faster, but also allows you to have lessons learned in the process, and then allows for you to see the type of development standards and the synergy that is created associated with the first phase, and then to say that you wanted to renegotiate the terms and conditions in subsequent phases. I just don't want to see a situation whereby we enter into a holistic agreement and then we find out 5 or 6 years later that we've left millions of dollars on the table. And so we do want to negotiate from a point of strength, and I think allowing for to look at it element by element provides a little bit less of a risk, but also allows for things to move a lot quicker. And it's the same type of process that you would look to enter into with a master developer, because conceivably you would not want development to happen on that parcel concurrently all at the same time. It would devastate your marina operation, it would impede your existing tenant, and you would have very little to no use at the Marina Event Center, because just the nature of construction, people avoid it. So you would have to phase the construction to start off anyway as a result of the project. So this is merely a policy decision, and where staff is asking for clarity from the board as to how they wish to proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. I think at this point we might want to have a motion that we move forward in a phased approach, element by element. I hate to do that in the absence of one of my colleagues. But
this is a workshop, right?
You're recognized.
Is this a workshop?
Oh, that's right, we
Right.
can't. I'm sorry. You're right. Thank you. So how are we going to do this?
And Madam Chair, we just need to, the major focus is that, does the board want the co-developers demonstrated financial capacity to be reviewed element by element? And so is there consensus from the board to accept that as the approach for when the financial consultant is going to review the capabilities of the co-developers?
So because we're not taking a vote, taking motion, taking any action at this meeting, would you like each of us to let you know how we feel?
We certainly would, and then what would happen, Madam Chair, at your next regular meeting of the CRA board, we would memorialize it in a resolution to then have the specific directive. Staff is taking notes regarding these particular questions.
Thank you. Mr. McCoy, how do you feel about considering this element by element?
I agree. I don't believe that there's any other way. Obviously, I think it was stated that I was going to suggest it because of the limitations on the charter for city-owned property. There would be totally different terms, just given the amount of time that we have that any kind of ground lease can occur on city property. So I don't know how you can compare those elements that's owned by the city even to what's owned by the CRA. So I certainly support, doing it by each element.
Thank you. Commissioner Lanier, how do you feel about this element by element? Commissioner Lanier? Commissioner Lawson, we're trying to get a sense from the commission about doing this element by element. How do you feel about approaching this on an element by element basis?
Approaching the phases of
Yes.
development.
Right.
I'm going to go with Mr. Evans' recommendation that he stated that this would be the best approach to go in a phased approach.
Thank you. Commissioner Miller Anderson, how do you feel about doing this element by element?
When you speak, could you come off the mic a little bit because it's really muffled. I can't really make out what you're saying, but I do know what you're saying. I just want to know, this is not going against any of our procurement processes where someone, well, they were the only two that did bid on it, but there wouldn't be an issue where someone would come to us later on down the line saying that we changed up how we were going to do it from the original bid release.
Commissioner Miller Anderson, this is Mike Haygood. In my opinion, it would not. I think at all times be considered to be a phased development. I don't think it was ever contemplated that it would be all developed at one time.
Did you hear that, Commissioner Miller Anderson?
Yes, I heard him.
Okay.
Yes, so I would not have an issue with it, with us going element by element.
Okay. Commissioner Lanier?
Yes, and I agree with that. And, you know, piggybacking off of even the mayor and Lawson in terms of, you know, moving this forward, the way that this is going now, this is going in phases, this is going in elements. One piggybacks off the other. It'll be 5 years down the road. We provide Tesoro with the element. We take the other elements, we put them out, and we can have construction going on simultaneously. Because the way that this is set up, it is set up where one phase piggybacks off of the other. This gets done, then that gets done. We can ask Tesoro what phase that what element you feel comfortable with. You feel comfortable in terms of financing. We provide them with that. We move forward and we put this out, and we can have construction going on simultaneously, and we can get this done quickly. And as I said before, with the city of Delray, they broke ground in November. They're about to be finished with what they have going on. And it's a huge project. And we could do the same thing.
Okay.
There's nothing that's stopping us from doing the same exact thing.
Thank you. I agree that we should do
Madam
it.
Chair.
Commissioner Miller Anderson, you're recognized.
I'm a little confused on what Ms. Lanier is saying. Now, when we're saying that we're going to put it out, we're going to do, phase it out by element, we're still saying with Tesoro and
Yes.
D, we're not talking about putting out new RFPs, are we?
No.
That's
Okay,
what I was.
Yeah, that's what she's saying.
That's her opinion.
That's what
I'm not sure that that's the sense I'm hearing from the rest of the commission.
No, this is
Yeah.
Commissioner Lanier talking.
Right.
And given the commissioners, all of the commissioners, all of us here have gotten to the point where this is 3 years in, potentially 4 years in. Everything is phased and piggybacking off of the other. We can provide Tesoro with a element. We could provide other local developers an opportunity for the other element to be able to be completed simultaneously. We can move forward with this very quickly with that. But the way that it is going, the way that it is set up, the way that we're talking about, it will be next year before we put a shovel in the ground for one of the elements. And that element may take 2 to 3 years to get done. It piggybacks off of another element, which is another 2 or 3 years. It'll be 5 to 7 years before we finish this project. We can get this project done quickly. If we look at the elements, have expertise and expert developers in those particular element areas, have them to do the work, put the solicitation out, open it up. That also includes other local developers, and we can move forward.
Madam Chair?
You recognize Commissioner
Thank you,
Lawson.
Madam Chair. While I hear Councilwoman Lanier's position of trying to get another RFP out, what I believe that we should focus on is phase one of moving this project forward, and with the CRA focusing on some of the other projects that we need to get off the ground. In the last 18 months, 19 months, we've erected our incubator program, which I'm excited for, but we have a building on the corner of Blue Heron Broadway. We have power lines and cable lines that need to be sunk in that we've been talking about. We have Avenue E that we need to address. I don't want to put another RFP and put an additional strain on the CRA to say, hey, let's focus on Marina Phase 2 now. Let's focus on Phase 1. Phase 2 of Marina, but Part 1 of Marina Phase 2.
2A.
2A, right. And then have the CRA focus on some of the other things and concerns that are going to allow for spurring development in the CRA. If we can't get this done within 3 to 6 months, we can put out another RFP. If we can't get these negotiations done, we can absolutely do that. But I don't want our CRA to start focusing on an additional RFP today when we have a number of projects that we have to work on that have to spur economic development, that have to work on the growth and development of our community. And those are things that the CRA can focus on, which is Avenue E, which is those power lines, which are the building that we purchased for $2.3 million on the corner of Blue Heron Broadway. These are all projects that we can do as a CRA and that CRA staff should be working on, and giving a certain timeline of 3 to 6 months to get this project negotiated and discussed, and we cut it off. If we can't get that done within that time frame, I believe the longest period that we had outlined was 180 days. That's 6 months. At that point, Councilwoman Neer, I would give then opportunity to say, let's go ahead and put out some additional RFPs. But I don't want to stretch our staff too thin when we still, and we haven't got anything accomplished. So I can't just say it's just phase 2. There's a lot of stuff across the board we have to do. And I don't want to stretch our staff too thin with putting another RFP to work on another proposal when there's other things in the CRA they need to accomplish now.
Thank you. Mr. Evans, do you have what you need?
I want to respond to, Madam Chair, I want to respond to Mr. Lawson.
Go ahead, Commissioner Lanier.
Councilman Lawson, I totally agree with you, but I really think that you underestimate the CRA staff. I think that we can walk and chew gum at the same time. We can do this deal. We can do this. We have things that have been going on since we came in the door and before. We have to be bold in how we're going to look at this project and all of our projects. And we can do it. Well, I mean, I don't see why we could not do it. I don't think that we'll be stretching the staff thin. I think that the staff is very capable of doing these multiple projects at one time. They're doing it now. And so we want to move forward. And if we're going to wait in phases, and this is 3 years, and this is 2 years, and this is another year, we'll never get there, Councilman Lawson. I'm just basing my observations on your frustration with this project not moving. And I think that all of us around the table have voiced this frustration of this project not moving. And I think this is an opportunity that we can do it. And I think that the staff that we have is capable of doing that.
Thank you, Commissioner Lawson. You're
And to
recognized.
that point, that used my infamous line of walking and chew gum. I completely agree. I'm not second guessing my staff. I believe that they can accomplish it, but there is so much that needs to be accomplished. Let's put their efforts and energy on trying to get the corner of Blue Heron Broadway done. Let's focus that energy on making sure that we get those lines.
Yeah, I did. I took that from you.
Let's get those lines put underground on Broadway that we've talked about from day one. We've said we were going to sink our power utility lines, and we haven't done that yet. Let's talk about Avenue E that we've discussed from the very beginning. So I'm very confident in my CRA staff and that they can do all of these projects, but let's be realistic that in 18 months, we've only erected a 400 square foot incubator program. So now you want to add additional facets to a phase 2 of the marina, which I think that I want to be cautious with how we do that. Let's let these developers get this out the way. Let Mr. Evans work with them in the next 3 to 6 months, and let's really focus on some of the things and discussions we've been having, because I'm frustrated not just because of phase 2. I'm frustrated because there's a lot of work in the marina, in the CRA, that hasn't been accomplished. And holistically, you're saying that they've been doing it. I haven't seen it yet. A 400 square foot building on the corner of Blue Heron Broadway with an incubator program that we approved the second meeting of the CRA. and literally 19 months later is not what I expected our CRA to be doing. So that's my concern, Councilwoman Lanier, and I think that we just need to start here and really put some additional pressure on the additional efforts, because if we can sync those lines, power lines on Broadway, if we can work on Avenue E, that's going to assist with spurring development in that corridor.
And with that, I think we'll close off the discussion of question number 1 and move on to question number 2, if you have what you need, Mr. Evans.
Yes, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Question number 2.
As we discussed earlier, I have read the operating agreement. A lot of there are going to be some modifications made to it depending on discussions and negotiations on the development agreement itself, such as default provisions, when in fact...
Could you speak a little closer to your mic?
Sorry.
Thank you.
When in fact if in fact there's a default, what will be the remedy? How much time will the developer have to remedy any defaults and so forth? So yes, the basic agreement is okay, but again, it's going to be devil's in the detail.
Thank you.
That's customary, and we would have no objections.
Any comments about that from commissioners? Question number 3.
The next question is, do we have consensus on the conceptual site plan? If not, what should be changed? Obviously, we talked about some of the retail as well as the residential elements that are contained in the conceptual site plan. At this particular moment, I will ask for Ms. Jenkins to provide some additional clarity and information concerning the housing element, because she has done some research and has had some conversations with the development group and has looked at what a mixture would look like, and then what is similar to the comments that the board has provided to staff, what is the element that we can allow for more inclusion in our community, and to ensure that our residents are participatory members of the development, and making sure they're not displaced as a result of the opportunities that we're looking to achieve here. So Ms. Jenkins has done some extensive work and research and has worked with the development group to bring you something this evening that speaks to the housing element. Ms. Jenkins?
Thank you, Mr. Evans, and good evening, Chair Botel, Commissioners, Mr. Mayor, and Mr. Evans and Mr. Evans. I took the liberty, after being asked to do some research on conditions here in Riviera Beach. And there were some questions about the median income and what is needed. And I know that Mr. Jonathan Evans has talked with you all about engaging someone to do a market study, which is one of the recommendations that staff is bringing forward that we definitely need to have. So I'm going to share some information and make a couple of comments in conjunction with the proposals from the developers, and then if you have questions, please ask. We all know that we have a tremendous need for affordable housing, and I'm going to come back to that term because sometimes affordable housing can be controversial, but we need to understand it and define it for our community. We need decent, safe, attractive, and resilient housing for all of our residents at all income levels, including rental and homeownership. Those issues have only been exacerbated by COVID-19 because of challenges with rental. We know that we have a low homeownership rate in our city, and according to the U.S. Census, the most recent information, we have a homeownership rate that is around 53% for all housing types. But in some of our neighborhoods in the city, that drops to around 35%, which is very critical. Our households are very high cost burden. And that means that our residents are spending more of their income for housing than they should be in order to have stable housing. Market rents, and there was a question, I think, a meeting or two ago about where would the rents be in this particular project? In Palm Beach County, market rents start at $2,000 and they go up. An average market rent is more than $3,000, and you'll find a lot of developments where it's $4,000 a month, and that's not affordable for residents here. We have, in fact, in terms of cost burden renters in the city, we have a proportion of 63% of our residents are cost burdened. They're paying more than they really can afford for housing. And if you add housing and transportation, that number combined is about 57%. Over the last several years, we have actually lost single-family and multifamily units. Not only do we have a great need for it, but we've lost units. Now, with our population and the number of households, we know that we have more people residing in a residence than the average household in the county, where on average there are 3.03 persons per household. And when you add that to vacancy rates, cost burden, et cetera, that means that our residents are living in overcrowded, overvalued situations. The median value of owner-occupied housing here in the city is $189,500. And that sounds very good, perhaps, but when you compare it to the median value in Palm Beach County as a whole is $283,600, more than 50% more in terms of the median value outside of the city. When you look at median gross rents in the city, it's $1,177. In the county, it's about $1,400.
Do you mind taking questions as you go?
I'll take them.
Just a quick one. Can you disaggregate that data and show by Singer Island versus mainland? And my concern about that is I think Singer Island rents and values tend to skew things in the direction that maybe you don't really see the real
burden. Exactly. And we'd have to do some further research and commission some research based on census block data, because from the aggregated data, we're not able to tell that. Our planning department perhaps can help us with that. But you're exactly right about the higher values, higher incomes on Singer Island are skewing our median income and median values. You're exactly right.
Excuse me, Commissioner McCoy had a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So to that same point, Ms. Jenkins, that's exactly what I was thinking. But help me understand, because this is where we start creating more and more bureaucracy. Your first statement that staff is going to bring forth a recommendation to commission a market study. Why? Can't that just be done already within the authority of the CRA executive director? And obviously, it would just make perfect sense. I mean, you almost have to do it in order to be able to set the framework and to negotiate the city's position when it comes to the overall Phase 2 development. So the idea of suggesting that we know how that information can be parsed will go hand in hand with a market study overall, as far as what the market demands for the Phase 2 in the immediate area they're in.
I would ask Mr. Jonathan Evans to respond about where the market study discussion is.
Yes, Commissioner, we can certainly look to do that, and the only reason that it would come back before the board in the event that we anticipate the study costing over $25,000, I don't think we'll get to that point, but we will move forward with the study, assuming that the information does come back under the purchasing threshold, but we don't anticipate bringing it back to the board for consideration unless it exceeds the purchasing authority.
Follow up. I would certainly like that, Mr. Evans. And, aside from the recommendation, if it gets close to that, I think you should definitely bring it back at the meeting. But, this whole December meeting really blew up because we had a consultant's report that determined that this wasn't that the project should be changed and the market drives it without having any kind of justification or support. So I would certainly ask that the CRA Executive Director starts this process, because it only literally guides where we're going, and it really complements what Ms. Jenkins is now suggesting. So that's all I have.
Thank you.
There was a question about the, I'm sorry.
Madam Chair, I had a question.
You're recognized, Commissioner Lanier.
Well, actually, it was a statement, and I hear Ms. Jenkins providing this information, which is excellent information, but you know, whatever that needs to be developed by the developers, the developer should study and bear the cost of this. I don't think that this is something that the CRA should be bearing the cost of and studying. These are the elements, or these are the housing that the developer wants to provide to the city, and studying that and getting market cost and market research should be done and borne by the developer and not by the CRA.
Anything else? Please continue.
I wanted to point out that the official fiscal 2020 area median family income and HUD and Florida Housing Finance has not released the 2021 numbers. We'll see those in March or April. The median family income for the county is $79,100. That's very high. The median household income in Riviera Beach is $47,000.
And that includes Singer Island.
Yes.
So it's even.
Yes. I wanted to go over some definitions that the county uses, and I know at some point in the near future we'll have a deeper discussion around housing in the city. The county defines extremely low income as households earning less than 30% of the county's median household income. Very low income are households earning between 31 and 50% of the county's median household income. Low income are households earning from 51 to 80%. Moderate income are those households from 81 to 120%, and middle income moving to market is 121 to 140, and market would be higher than that. And based on the median family income, even the low income households, that's quite a bit that people have to have for housing. And we can share the charts and everything with you. The maximum sales price for programs working with the county, $331,288. And things like that are important when you start looking for sources to assist with subsidized housing. There was something else I wanted to mention about, I'll come back to that. Some conclusions just from these facts are, we have a great,
it's that, I don't know who that is, but if it's Commissioner Miller Anderson, it sounded like her voice, didn't it?
Just some.
No, that's not me. No, I'm on mute.
Well, go ahead. I don't know who that was.
Just some conclusions from the data that we have. There's a great need for rental and ownership housing. We know that. Median housing values in Riviera Beach are 66.8% of Palm Beach County values. Riviera Beach median income is 59.7% of the county median income. Mixed income properties are desirable, and they're desirable not only from building community, but also in terms of financing projects. Because we have multiple goals for economic development, social goals, etc. And some suggestions from our staff studies are projects where there's a mix of incomes between 30 and 80%, units that are between 80 and 120%, and then units that are 120% to market rate. And that is also in line with some of the discussions that this board has had over the last few months. Subsidies from a variety of sources will be necessary to meet income targeting. Financing is difficult, and I'm saying that because if there's a desire to build all market rate units, then you can go for conventional financing, but you also have to have a market for those units. In order to meet not only the needs of some of our residents as well as the surrounding area, any project that is developed will need an assortment of financing, will need subsidies. Riviera Beach has lost ownership and rental units over the last few years with high vacancy rates with our rental. Strongly suggests that our residents are priced out of the market and are living in overcrowded conditions. And if I may, there was a question, I think question 16, that the developers asked if the Riviera Beach CDC would be interested, or are you looking for the nonprofit to work with the development. I've polled the CDC's board, and they would be interested in participating in the project, perhaps to attract some of those soft dollars, depending upon what is decided upon. And we've already talked about the fact that a market study is needed. So I'll stop and see if there are any questions.
Thank you. Any questions? Comments? Well, it sounds to me that it's clear from your perspective that we need to have a mixture of opportunities for people going from almost affordable to market rate, and that would be the best use of this for this project. Yeah. Any comments from the gallery above, Commissioner Miller Anderson or Lanier? Okay.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I have some questions, but I'll wait. There's another presentation. Am I correct?
Well, that was the end of the presentation on the on item number 3, which is consensus on the conceptual site plan. In other words, they want to know, are we okay with doing a mixture of affordable versus affordable to market rate? And I sounds like that's the best sounds to me like that's a good recommendation. Does anybody have an objection?
I don't have an objection to it. I mean, of course, that seems about the way that the city should be going in terms of the population that we have here. But let me ask this question: this is not for Ms. Jenkins. Are we going to go through all 16 of these questions tonight?
Yes, we are. If we can keep our comments brief.
Good Lord! I mean, this should have been 2 meetings because they're to 16. Good. Okay.
Okay. So, Mr. Evans, do you have? I think there's a consensus that the council or the commission rather would like to see a mix of housing types. Anybody object to that? Okay. Item number 4.
Wait a minute. Hold on. I also like to say that sometimes, especially in our community, market rate is considered to be is considered to be luxury housing. So I think that we also should be talking about the income levels of the families that live in the city as well.
Okay, thank you. Item number 4.
The item number 4, the question is, are we in agreement with the order of redevelopment, the phasing, and the timeline for the target start of construction? The developers have proposed to proceed with Elements 8, which is Spanish Courts, which is a residential project and parking garage, as well as building out the event center, and then pursuing pad site A, putting 1 restaurant on our promenade. And phasing is very important because we have to ensure continued parking for the event center, for our wet slip marinas, for the operations of those. We need lay-down area for construction. We need vehicle and pedestrian access to the areas of the marina that will remain open, including Bicentennial Park and our beach vendors. And so staff's opinion is that these elements would be the ones that we could achieve with the least amount of interruption of parking and operations, and still have a phase one that's of substantial size to create tax revenue and complete the project quickly. And in regards to the targeted start of construction, I think that I know that I've heard comments tonight that we would like to make that happen as quickly as possible.
Yesterday would be good.
And I think the developer's proposal that we spend the next 90 to 120 days to negotiate the first elements. I think during that time that we need to report back to this board with a combined timeline and construction schedule, so that we can try and identify how we can speed it up and hopefully get this board's support as we negotiate to pursue as an aggressive schedule as possible.
Thank you. Does anyone object to staff's recommendation?
Madam Chair, can we give them?
Yes, I have a question.
Go ahead, Commissioner Lanier.
The event center is pretty much, in terms of expansion, the event center is pretty much done. The event center was not a part of the original master development. Why are we including that in a part of the master development in terms of the event center? The event center is basically, all intents and purposes, on its own. I mean, it can do its own expansion. Why are we roping this into the development plan?
The spaces inside the event center that are unfinished were included in the RFP for master developer, and they have provided proposals which they referenced briefly, including the swing suite, and to complete it. And we have vacant space on the second floor and then the first floor also.
We're talking about the whole entire thing. They were not talking about the rooms. You're saying that the rooms were a part of the master development plan, but there was nothing a part of the plan about this large expansion. I didn't see it. It was not a part of that.
Mr. Evans. Scott.
Mr. Brown, perhaps if you want to come up and just go over element 0 is the event center, and of course the building is that we're currently in.
He doesn't have to go over it. It wasn't a part of the original plan.
Well, this is Vaughn Irons, and in our original proposal and every subsequent proposal, we did include leasing the vacant space as triggered by the request in your original RFP. So what we're referencing today in element 0 and element 1 have consistently been a part of all of our submissions.
The rooftop was not a part of that.
Absolutely it was.
But
It was not.
To Ms. Lanier's question or concern, the original RFP asked the developers to respond to their approach to finishing the development and management of the event center.
And it was not a part of your proposal. I disagree, but you can go ahead.
It should be a matter of fact.
Madam
You're recognized, Commissioner Lawson.
Councilwoman Lanier, it was absolutely a part of the original proposal because I brought to the council the option of expanding the Rafiki Tiki 6 to 8 months ago, and council advised us that as part of phase 2 discussions, we could not have an expansion of the Rafiki Tiki because it's part of the proposal that we're discussing. We're finishing the interior building and the rooftop. So we actually discussed that aspect of the proposal about 8 months ago.
Right, you discussed it, but it was not a part of the original proposal, sir. We discussed it. You may have added it, but it was not a part of the original proposal. But we can move on.
Madam Chair, if I could make a recommendation that we require 90 days with bi-weekly updates from staff for the timeline that was discussed. They asked for 90 to 120 days. We're getting bi-weekly updates at our CRA meetings to see the progress from our executive director and allow for us to have a discussion agreement within the next 90 days.
Does anyone object to that? We're not going to vote, but.
I know.
Yes, I do.
Anyone else object? Sounds like you have a consensus. Is that all we have on item 4?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Okay.
Everybody agrees. You have a consensus of the majority of the board. That's what you should say, Madam Chair.
I'm sorry, I couldn't understand you.
You're saying you have a consensus. You have a consensus of the majority of the board, not the entire board.
No, not the entire board. That's not, we don't have, if we had a vote, I have a sense, if we were voting in a regular meeting, not a workshop, my sense is that we would have at least a 3-person vote to obtain those kinds of presentations from staff.
Right, and that would be a consensus of the majority of the board, not the entire board.
Right. Item number 5.
Quick question, Madam Chair. Mr. Jonathan Evans, is it possible to get our colleagues and speakers on the screens as well, please?
I'm not I would have to defer to Mr. Stevens. Is that a capability?
Well, for me, I will not be cutting on my camera tonight.
That was the request, yes.
Okay, that's not going to happen, I think. Okay. Item number 5.
Question number 5 is, do we have agreement on land use regulation and zoning? If not, what should change? The current zoning and plans in the area currently allow mixed use within the marina, which allows flexible development. The current zoning is limited to 8 stories, and we've asked the development team to investigate the feasibility of constructing higher and to work with us to determine what any other changes that might be required in order to complete the project. We are going to embark upon a review of our overall density in the Broadway corridor and throughout the CRA, and that will look at other various components of the marina. If in order for us to move as quickly as possible, and the first element being element 8, I believe that that particular site is best suited as it is right now, which is for an 8-story limit with maybe some potential changes to the land development regulations to make sure that we can build it as planned. But we would like to study increasing the zoning and heights throughout the CRA and the Broadway corridor, and we're proceeding with that. And then we just wanted to poll the board to see if they were accepted with the concept plan, but specifically if you found that 8 stories for that first project was acceptable. In our discussions with the development team, we also identified that if we were to go higher for some elements, future elements of the project, once you go above that 8-story height limit, of course, the cost of construction goes up. So they really need to look, they said that they're going to look at it carefully to see if that's feasible. And since element 8 is going to include workforce housing, increasing the costs of that project might make it not feasible. So we think that element 8 is ideally designed at 8 stories.
And we fully concur. And we fully concur and will be very cooperative in that visioning process.
Any comments or questions from commissioners?
Madam Chair, could you have the CRA director send me a copy of that original proposal now, please?
I'm sorry, could you say that again?
I need to get a copy now. I know I have it somewhere. A copy of the original proposal. Send that to me now, please.
Mr. Evans, can you do that now?
I will pull it up.
Okay.
Madam Chair, and just quickly on the particular item that Mr. Evans just spoke about, based on the last board's action, we did talk about treasury.
We're having a discussion about the original proposal.
Can we let Mr. Evans finish, please? Go ahead.
I wanted to speak briefly on the comments with regards to land use and zoning, and we talked about density and intensity. Obviously, the board did provide direction at your last meeting to proceed forward with engaging.
Is someone going to send me a copy of the original proposal?
Is she talking to us? I think she's talking to us.
Yes, I was saying, I mean to cut Mr. Evans off, but is someone going to send me a copy of the original proposal?
I think he's working on it, Commissioner Lanier.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Evans?
Yes, so I did want to state on the record that the board did provide us direction to move forward with Treasurer Coast for the looking at the densities and intensities in our land use and zoning with regards to this particular project. So we are moving forward with that particular element, working with them to assist in the process. So that's going to be an expeditious process because we don't have to go through the competitive solicitation process, as we can get into an interlocal because they function as a government entity.
Okay, so you don't need anything else from us on this item, right?
No, Madam Chair.
Okay. Item number 6.
With regards to both items 6 and 7, it is an element that should be discussed and negotiated as part of subsequent phases, but it talks about the desires with regards to a ground lease or a outright sale of the parcels. It's staff's recommendation that both 6 and 7 are subject to the negotiations, and then we can bring 2 options that gives the board the opportunity to look at if there was a sale of the property or if there was a ground lease. That can be something that can be further flushed out, but we just wanted to see if the board had any objection or issue with either of those, or if you wanted to see what both those options would look like.
Any objections? I hear none, Mr. Evans. Item number 8.
Item number 8, in this particular, the question is there agreement on parking? All or some spaces should it be owned by the city? And I think this has already been subject to quite a bit of discussion earlier tonight. Staff believes that we do have a specific demand for public parking, and our position is that the city should provide some funding to help build the public parking that we need for this project. And we need the public parking to be integrated into the parking garage so that we can develop our current parking areas, which are on the surface. So I think that we need to move forward to negotiate that mix. Obviously, the developers are proposing to do some private elements, which they'll need to provide parking for, but we need to negotiate how much that mix is between the public parking we need for the marina, Bicentennial Park, and the event center, and then add additional parking for the other private elements, retail, and the housing.
Thank you. Any commissioners object to that?
Madam Chair?
You're recognized, Commissioner Lanier.
If we have a lease, the CRA, we need to have a split of the revenue.
Mr. Evans?
I think I heard that we should split the revenue on the parking. Is that, and I think that that's something we have started already discussing with the development team.
Okay. That's to be negotiated. Anything else?
How can we negotiate a split of the revenue? We have to make money too.
Yes, our negotiations would include revenue sharing for those parking spaces.
And what is the estimated cost? Or was it the estimated percentage?
With regards to the parking, it was stated that based on the preliminary assessment that there's roughly about 1,600 parking spaces when you look at complete build out. Those are elements that we would still have to do a comprehensive parking analysis because it is quite expensive for parking. We would look at a situation.
We don't have a percentage now that we're talking about that we're negotiating. There's a percentage in the air that we're talking about in terms of this split.
We haven't gotten down to the granular level with regards to the split because we still need to find out what that number is as it relates to parking to be able to accommodate the development.
But that certainly needs to be a part of the lease, splitting the revenue.
Okay, you're absolutely going to consider that. Item number 9.
Item number 9, is there an agreement on the management of the uplands property and the public sources for payment of common area expenses? The board, this is an item for board consideration. I'll just provide a little bit of comment. Our approach in developing the RFP is that the developer should take over management and coordination of the uplands once we have a development deal that ensures all of the public access and the public assets we've already developed are protected. This is important because we're trying to create a destination property, and that requires managing multiple business owners, multiple developments, and creating a customer experience that is critical to trying to create an environment where you can attract both visitors, residents, and people who are visiting from outside the state. So we think that we should work towards creating a situation where the developer manages the overall experience of the development, but of course, the city, as you know, would always remain the owner of the land, and we would also participate on all of the committees and the management of those resources. So I believe that this is an item that the board needs to make a decision on, and we're hoping for some direction if we could proceed in that pathway.
Okay. Comments from commissioners?
Madam Chair?
You're recognized.
So what would that phase come in? Phase 2, phase 3, when would that come in?
Mr. Evans?
That's a good question. I think that we would be working towards the next phase at the completion of the next phase, that would begin. And obviously, we're going to have to coordinate to ensure that the construction period is managed. But during that construction period, I think we'll have limited events, and we'll just be trying to stay open, not trying to grow our visitorship. So at the completion of the next phase, which is Spanish Courts and the build-out of the event center and restaurant Pad A, I think at that time it's critical that we start to create that destination attraction.
So I mean, if we don't have a timeline, I think that this question is premature.
Mr. Evans?
I think it's up to the board. If you just determine that you want to decide that later, then we can do that.
We would have to. The question is premature. We don't know what phase is going to come in. We don't know the timeline. So how can we make a decision about it right now?
I think the reason we're asking the question is because during our negotiations with the developers, that's going to inform some of the outcomes that we bring back to this board to consider. So we were trying to poll the board to see what your opinion so that if we moved in that direction, then we could be productive in our discussions with the developers towards that.
Madam Chair?
You're recognized, Mr. Lawson.
Mr. Evans, I believe that some of the issues of the additional progress and development are going to have to be independent of this first negotiation. So we can't have those discussions of those uplands without actually, because I know that would be better for the developers, but as a city, we can't include that into our negotiations and discussions because we don't know if they'll complete or process or get through phase 2, part A, whatever we're calling it right now. So once we get through that facet, then we can have these discussions of the uplands. But right now, if it's not part of this initial discussion, I think we move on to question 10.
Are we all okay with postponing?
Excuse me, if you don't mind me just offering just a bit of perspective on this particular point. If you want to recruit national credit tenants in destination retail, one of the questions they're going to ask in their leasing arrangements is who is the property and the experiential manager. So whether you negotiate, with us at this point, it will have to be solved before we can effectively produce the tenant mix that you're looking for and sign leases for any destination tenants or national credit tenants.
Thank you. Mr. McCoy?
Madam Chair, question for APD Tazewell. The proposed, I guess, can you describe the Uplands Marina property? Is it those identified 1 through 5?
If I understood the question, can we describe the Uplands property?
Yeah, based off of the site plan, the conceptual site plan that you.
Yes, so it's basically the city-owned marina between Avenue C and the waterfront, between Bicentennial, or including Bicentennial Park, and as far south as the port, east of Avenue C. North of the port, whatever that road, I think that's 11th Street. So do we have the best map? So the Uplands property is the city-owned property east of Avenue C. Now, there is, I guess, the parcel that the CRA owned, having acquired Vikings parcel that used to be inside the marina. So there is a parcel exception. But I think in general, we define the Uplands property to be east of the water. I'm sorry, west of the water, and east of Avenue C between Bicentennial Park and north of the port.
And I would just amend that because the Marina Village district is larger and the parking sources for all of the restaurants would be in the parking garage, I think we'd also be looking to include those sites 7 and 8 in that overall management approach.
Yeah, and I guess you've seen the benefit of my historical knowledge. The reference to the upland marina has a charter requirements, meaning what you are allowed to lease, the term of that lease, and what you may or may not be able to sell. So we were using sort of, I think, the legal reference to the limitations on the uplands marina as it relates to restrictions on leasing and selling per your charter.
Thank you. Mr. McCoy, you recognized?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, Mr. S. Evans, so that would not include number 7 and 8 because those aren't subject to the charter provision. So, obviously, and then if number 8, the proposed residential and 7 on the Spanish Court site, that wouldn't be inclusive of the marina upland by definition anyways. Now, if you're suggesting a separate management component of 7 and 8, that's just not described in the definition of marina upland. Is that accurate?
Yes, and these questions were posed by the developer, and so that specifically Mr. Brown was suggesting, the upland definition per city. But since we were talking about management of the whole experience and the destination, I just wanted to include that we need to consider elements 7 and 8 because they're going to contain the parking that's critical to the restaurants and the experience we're providing on the whole waterfront.
Correct.
So this is a pretty serious, item number 10 is a pretty impactful conversation. And although it seems like there is a desire on the part of the developers to have us have this conversation this evening, I'm not sure I have enough familiarity with the pros and cons of having them manage it versus having us manage it. And I'd like to have a little bit more information from staff as to what they feel are the benefits to allowing them managing and as against us. So if in my mind, I think if we could postpone this just for a bit, not necessarily postpone it for a matter of months, but postpone it to another time when we could be provided with a little more information and guidance from staff, I would appreciate that. Do my colleagues agree?
I agree.
I agree with that part.
Okay. All right, thank you. Item number 11. Sorry, I thought that was 10.
That was 10?
I think that was 10.
Yep.
Oh, no, I'm sorry, you're right. That was 9. That was 9. Okay. Item number 10. I feel the same, actually, I feel the same way about item number 10. I think these two, items 9 and 10, are so impactful that I would like to have more information from staff and staff's recommendation as to which way they think we should go. Anybody disagree?
Well, Madam Chair?
Yes.
Mr. Irons did make some comments that's stated that the discussions of the developers and the progress, is this going to delay or hold up the discussions of what we're going to encompass into this first phase of negotiations?
No, I think I interpret the board's direction is that we could have the conversation with staff, and from that conversation, they'll hear our points.
Yeah.
And then from there, they can formulate a recommendation to you.
Yeah.
And to that point,
quickly.
To that point, Madam Chair, I just don't want to delay.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree. No, this is something I would like to have us see back in the very short term.
No, and I imagine not only is it important for you to determine who's managing it, obviously the development of private development means you have another contributor to covering the cost of your common area maintenance.
Right.
And if I'm not mistaken, I think in the CRA budget, it's costing you $1 million or close to manage the uplands property. So getting private development quickly will offset that expense.
Okay. And to that point, Madam Chair, cities should not be in the business of managing these properties. Right. So private sector should be definitely handling that. And But we're not, of course, just going to give it away, so it has to be part of the negotiation discussion. But I do agree with Madam Chair in regards to just getting some more insight to determine how we move forward.
Thank you. Item number 11.
The question submitted for 11 is, post-pandemic, what's the vision to activate public spaces, Bicentennial Park, Boardwalk, including the amount and sources required to market and promote marina and special events? The board in the past several years has reduced the marketing and promotions that the CRA has been engaged in on the site. And during COVID, I think that's a reasonable expectation. But even before COVID, the board's direction was that the CRA limit the number of events that we put on at the Marina Event Center and on the upland properties. I think it's critical that we attract residents and visitors to the marina, and if the development team wanted to manage and implement a series of events and marketing, I think it's important that we participate in that, not only to ensure that this new destination gets launched correctly, but also to help ensure that we can include some public events that in that plan that the community wants. So I would just say that we're looking for direction of the board if we wanted to expand what the CRA does for event programming for the next phase of the project, or if you wanted us to work with the developers to have them produce a plan, and would the board like us to consider contributing dollars to that combined marketing plan?
Any comments from my colleagues? No? Yes?
Madam Chair?
Mr. Was that a no? Yes, it was a yes. Commissioner McCoy and then Commissioner Lawson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So the question just kind of is pretty loaded and is really unpredictable at this moment. I mean, to kind of start a discussion on what's going to drive this, I mean, speaking of years down the line, I don't know, is this some reason that we need to have some direction on this now? Because, I mean, this is really subject to change. We don't know what's going to happen in March. Obviously, this is, it doesn't really, for me, constitute as something that's a negotiable item at this point, unless you have some other premise on why you presented this question. It's just really hard for us to set forth what we can expect in 6 or 9 months or even 2 years from now relative to how we promote.
Mr. McCoy, a lot of these questions was raised when your previous consultant was asking us to present a proposal related to the whole development of the entire marina. And we made proposals and we made certain assumptions that we didn't receive concurrence or denial on. And so we just said that these are the open questions that really is going to determine or stage our process of negotiating. And I'm certain that staff has a position and an idea, and they'll consult with you. And then eventually, when it's important to know how we're marketing the marina and the event center and the park and who's paying for it and all those things, I think when the time is right, we'll have those discussions, and it'll be part of a holistic management agreement. If I'm not putting words into Mr. Irons' ears or mouth, but I think his vision for how, if in the agreement that the management of Marina Village, I won't reference it as the upland property, if the management of Marina Village is the responsibility of the private partner, then obviously we want to drive tourists to the site. We want to encourage residents and all the wonderful things that I've seen come out of the CRA in terms of special events. We want to talk about how do we maintain that and even strengthen it, and then and how we pay for it between charging tenants, making it a developer responsibility, or a partnership between us and the city or the CRA as other areas do it.
And Tony, I would definitely agree with the statements that you made, but I think everyone also has to understand that we will have a responsibility of going out nationwide and recruiting tenants and putting together a strong tenant mix for the site. And so, we're going to have to go to Vegas, to ICSC. We're going to have to go to New York, where the big restaurants, retailers, and entertainment groups go in order to negotiate their contracts. And one of the questions they're going to ask is who's the management? Is it a respectable private management? And that's the benefit of bringing in urban retail to take that part on. But they're also going to ask specifically about marketing at the site, general foot traffic, and who the attractions and the anchors are. And so our ability to effectively answer that question is going to produce a tenant mix at a different level, but will have direct economic implications to the site and to the revenues that you all will have the ability to share.
I just want to add that we currently have, sorry, I have a group of about 60 industry leaders that make up a tourism task force. We're developing a tourism master plan. A couple of people in this room are on that task force, Mr. Evans and Mr. Sherman back there, and one or two others. And we're going to come up with some recommendations for how we promote tourism in general in Riviera Beach. So I think that might inform the answer to this question as well. Do you agree, Scott?
Just,
yeah.
Yes. Madam Chair.
Yes, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Evans, would you be able to just bring back to the board some information on who is managing and operating and overseeing, Mr. Jonathan Evans, boardwalks and bicentennial parks in the Tampa area, Baltimore, Atlanta, just some of the larger municipal areas throughout the country. Tampa has a beautiful municipal park, has a beautiful boardwalk, beautiful bicentennial park, and even some of the local ones in Palm Beach County, just to kind of get some insight as to what they're doing, who's doing the management, how they're operating, so that we can make a educated decision in how we move forward with the management of our boardwalk.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we can put this aside a little bit, right? Okay, item number 12.
The question submitted for number 12 is what additional infrastructure investments are required for the marina and who should pay for these items? What accommodations are required to relocate the marina offices and showers and the source of funds to offset these expenses? And I believe that the development team is going to need to assess our existing infrastructure. Following tonight's meeting, I think we'll have a very good idea of what elements they're going to need to develop first. So they'll have to assess our existing plans or as-built drawings to come up with what we need to add to the project. I think the creation of new 12th Street and additions and improvements to the entrance to the marina at 13th Street, and potentially those connections, those pedestrian connections to the waterfront are areas of public infrastructure that I think that the city is going to need to look at making improvements to. The marina offices and related amenities will be relocated to the water side of the marina as a part of the next phase of that project. So that's not something that I believe that the developers need to make accommodations for. And we'd be just looking for this board's feedback on the creation of a new 12th Street and enhancements to 13th Street as a part of this overall project.
So clarify, please, what it is you want from us.
That's sort of what I see it. 12th Street and 13th Street are the major public access ways that I think that we're going to need to contribute to. Obviously, we've talked about parking also. That's a major infrastructure component. And then I would let the developer, Mr. Brown, clarify what else he's looking for.
And we recognize there's a comfort level and then there's a discomfort level. And I think we just have to be reasonable in our thinking and understand what's going to spark development and allow for the type of marina development that you want and that we can develop and that is reasonable in terms of closing gaps. I think that's the bottom line.
Okay. Anything?
Madam Chair.
You reckon?
Recent conversations, we had a joint council meeting with Lake Park, and some of the insight that they gave was capital contributions to community. I believe it was 1.8 million
with an annual increase to their tax roll of 1.7 annually. And that was based upon the development on a 5-block parcel. I would love to see some type of contribution towards infield infrastructure with the development that we have going on there, and assisting with closures if necessary, creating larger block parcels for development between 12th and 13th, but doing something that's going to be impactful for the community where we can have some funding to assist with development, because the city is cash strapped when it comes to growing and building, but we want to see development. So we're willing to invest into infrastructure, assisting with the things necessary, expedited permitting, zoning, intensities and densities. The board has been consistent with discussions about height densities, as long as it doesn't impede on our residents. So there's a lot of things that the city can do when it comes to policy making, but I know that the capital contribution that Lake Park received for their development, we do also understand that they're going up to 22 stories. So that's a major factor when it comes to the developers and the cost revenue they're going to receive. But if there can be some capital contributions to the infrastructure that we have in that area that we need to work on. And I discussed earlier some of the lines, portable lines, FNL and Comcast being sunken. Those are something that we want to expedite, and I'm sure that we're going to need funding to support that process as well, in addition to Avenue E. So,
well, and to your credit, and I think this was one of the points that Mr. Irons made, is that Phase 1 was a substantial investment in infrastructure. Avenue C was rebuilt. I think we made a contribution, or the CRA made a contribution to upgrading the utilities that ran along Avenue C. As we were trying to attract a restaurant along Restaurant Road, one thing that we probably didn't do well is I think it was sized for a 1-inch grease line, and experienced restaurateurs feel like they need a bigger grease line. But to your credit, there was a huge investment made to jumpstart private development at the marina. And there are some things that you have since corrected, like the wall, the seawall. We probably need to look at the second floor and whether or not that should be a solid wall or something that you can see the park and water. So I think those are the things that when we start talking about visitors' experience and taking advantage of the waterfront, we did some things right and other things need to be tweaked. But to your credit, I think the investment you made in Phase 1 was intended to spark private development, and you did a pretty good job.
and that's part of the concern that I don't want us to make a misstep with when it comes to that development. The marina should be 3 to 4 stories so that we can have a better view of the water, but we have this beautiful marina. So, but to have the sight lines and the viewing of this intercoastal, one of the most beautiful intercoastals in the South, that we want to take advantage of it. That's why we have to have these discussions, which was one of the questions earlier about the zoning, the densities, the intensities, which we've constantly talked about. So infrastructure-wise, just to get this first phase going, to address, like Scott Evans stated, 12th and 13th Street. And I think that we need to focus there.
Anything else? You okay? Item number 13.
Item number 13, what contributions, if any, is the CRA willing to make for pre-development expenses such as studies, legal, land use, planning, site assessments, and other public realm investments such as streetscape, landscape, and others to be negotiated? It's staff's perspective that this is something that we should look to do as you look to collect impact fee monies or monies associated with the TIF that will be derived from certain projects. It's always good to reinvest back into the impacted areas. Obviously, it's required by statute, but the other side of it is there is ways to improve physical infrastructure to be able to accommodate some of the things that would occur in that particular area. And so we know that there is a desire from the board to look at land use and look at changing our densities and intensities, and that's looking at it holistically. And as we look at it, we certainly are going to bring recommendations to the board as it relates to these parcels as well as other parcels within the city of Riviera Beach to create an opportunity that allows for redevelopment of the Broadway corridor. Also, we know that we're going to be moving forward with a housing study looking at what the need is in our community and how do we address that. And certainly as we look to make some improvements to the pedestrian as well as the vehicular experience There is going to be physical infrastructure improvements that are going to have to be made, so hardscape, streetscape, and the like. But it is our intent that this is, in essence, a cost of doing business, and I think it is something that, as we find funds available as it relates to this particular project, that it should be reinvested in the project to increase the overall experience, because we want folks to see and have a good time in our community, and we think by reinvesting in the project, it will allow for additional synergy to occur. So it's staff's recommendation that items that are going to increase the community aesthetics, increase the opportunities for our residents in our community to socialize and have activities, but also to address the physical infrastructure improvements. This is something that certainly we should reinvest monies that we collect associated with the development that is contemplated on the site.
Does anyone disagree with staff's recommendation?
Madam Chair.
I do.
You recognized Commissioner Lawson and then Commissioner Lanier, it sounded like.
I agree. Just to recap, Mr. Evans, the land use updates, buried utilities, road closures, and focusing on Avenue E. Some of the factors that I think will help spur that development there and up the entire Broadway corridor. So that I completely agree with you, Mr. Evans.
Commissioner Lanier?
I agree with the Avenue E and the other items, but not for this particular project. If we're going to be spending money, it needs to be in our existing projects that we're trying to get off the ground, not for this particular project.
Okay. Item number 14.
This particular item is speaking on the inclusion of the CDC as a development partner for workforce housing concepts. And so you did hear from Ms. Jenkins with regards to the housing concept and what we think will work in our community. And this is to seek direction from the board. Does the board wish to have the CDC participate as a development partner for the workforce housing element?
Madam Chair?
You're recognized.
So what would that look like? I know she briefly stated it, but what are we exactly talking about? What type of involvement?
As Ms. Jenkins.
Jenkins is getting to a microphone.
If I may, Commissioner, it has to be negotiated, but generally in developments of these types, there is some role for the nonprofit. If there are tax credits, sometimes depending upon the request for proposals from the state, a nonprofit can enhance the scorability of an application. The nonprofit could also apply for dollars that a private entity or local government cannot. For instance, the Riviera Beach CDC is qualified as a Choto organization. There are some foundation funds where some philanthropic organizations are interested in redevelopment areas that would be interested in working with a nonprofit. But in terms of what the actual development agreement would look like, that's something that would have to be negotiated.
Okay, so for me, if I don't want to commit to anything today with that until I have information.
It obviously will be something that I'll discuss with Cornerstone, but what I've seen in other agreements is that at the end of the tax credit compliance period, the property could revert to a nonprofit or have the first right. As Ms. Jenkins indicated, there are grant funds and forgivable loans that are available if the nonprofit is part of the redevelopment. And in addition to that, and Cornerstone has shown exceptional insight to community amenities where they provide even down payment assistance funding to tenants so that when they decide to go from being a renter to a homeowner, those things can be programmed. So there's just so many different ways that we can be creative to take care of all your residents in this new development that I think it'll be an exciting discussion to have.
Madam Chair?
You're recognized.
As Commissioner Lawson alluded to earlier in the discussion, the CRA and the CDC, already have projects that are in need of getting done. I think we need to make those our priority. The CRA can basically play that role, but we need to make sure that the projects that are on the table with the CDC, the projects that the CRA is currently undertaking, those need to be a priority as well. And and as Mr. Commissioner Lawson put it so eloquently, to overburden these departments with this project is something that we need to have some serious discussion and consideration for. And then two, that's again, that again changes the proposal. I'm looking at it now. That again changes how the original proposal that was submitted. So I can see the CDC assisting with the down payment and getting individuals involved. But other than that, I don't think that we should be having that conversation right now about being a partner.
Mr. McCoy, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So exactly, I don't know that it does do anything to the proposal because the CDC is completely independent of the city. While some of the efforts are parallel, the CDC has absolutely nothing to do with our work as CRA commissioners, nor as city council members. I yield.
Thank you. Anyone else? I have no problem with having the CDC work with the developer.
Right, but Madam Chair, follow up. We don't have any say in that.
Yeah,
right? So, but I guess if the opportunity presents itself where the developer has the ability to partner with the CDC, that's not a decision that's driven by us.
Yeah. Right.
So, I mean, I certainly would appreciate that they're working with a group that is within our community that we know so well, but it's not
up to us to decide. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, but it is up for us to decide because Ms. Jenkins works for the CDC, but the CRA pays her salary, so it does concern us, and it should be for further discussion.
Does anyone else have an objection to the developer working with this Riviera Beach CDC as a partner for the workforce housing? We hear you, Commissioner Lanier, that you have an objection. Does anybody else have an objection?
Yes, and I have an objection as well.
Okay. I think that we hear that. Mr. Evans, there's one objection to this. So item number 15.
There was 2 objections.
I'm sorry. Thank you. There are 2 objections.
Okay. Madam Chair, what community benefit components should be negotiated along with development elements? It's staff's recommendation that we take that based on element by element approach. That gives us an opportunity to look at what specific community benefits that we want to see realized as a result of the development that is contemplated. So our intent is to look at that individually versus looking at it holistically.
Okay. So you don't need anything from us.
If it's the board's concurrence with that approach.
Does anybody object? Commissioner Lawson?
No, well, not objection, but I guess I'm just want clarity on the question. It's asking what community benefit components. So we are going to just take it piece by piece, but what are the actual components of that with the first piece that we're going to do? And I think that's part of and I guess just for clarity and understanding, so that this doesn't come back before the board, are we having the discussion of what community benefit components, or the fact that we're just going to take it per phase?
It's staff's recommendation to take it per phase, and then based on what that particular phase looks to deliver, then to speak to specifics as it relates to that particular element. So taking it separate and apart versus looking at it holistically.
So in layman's terms, in the event that it's housing in phase 1, we may be looking at down payment assistance for community residents. If it's social engagement, we may look at something else.
Correct.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Okay.
Madam
16.
Yes. Does the CRA intend to use Riviera Beach CDE to raise private capital through new market tax credit programs if the program is extended? This is a question that's been proffered by the developer, and so I'll allow for the developer to provide some additional insight with regards to that particular ask, and then staff can follow up with some additional comments.
With the CARES Act, the New Markets Tax Credit Program was extended another 5 years. It's an arsenal in your toolbox, and it's one in which other communities have used extensively in order to subsidize the cost of development. Whether the Riviera Beach CDE wants to pursue its own allocation, it don't particularly matter because there are other entities that have received tax credits. The only issue is when you pursue tax credits from another entity, we have to be shovel ready. If Riviera Beach successfully, and it is very competitive, successfully secured its own allocation, then it's a more patient source of capital as we work through the development agreement for the hotel, restaurant row, and it is largely used to provide private capital for commercial small business uses. And that's it in general.
Madam Chair.
You're recognized, Commissioner. I think it was Miller Anderson I heard.
Lanier.
Oh, sorry, Lanier. Hard.
I disagree with this. The CDE is supposed to have been closed out by now anyway. Second of all, if there's money to be gotten from the CDE, I think the city and the CRA should be getting the money and not a developer.
Question.
Commissioner.
I'm not sure if I understand how Commissioner's question and response relates to what we're saying, but
the next application.
Mr. McCoy has the floor.
The CDE is the only enterprise that's able to go to the private markets to raise money. In the event that, for instance, this board decides that we want to pursue financing, the CRA would be prohibited. So that's exactly what the CDE's purpose is. We're not suggesting closing out the CRA because we're not suggesting closing out the CDC. At least that's what I don't believe the question is. But there are dollars that's in the CDE, and I think, aren't they associated with this building, Mr. S. Evans?
The existing CDE does have assets, yes.
And the purpose was relative to, I guess, is it the Marina Event Center rental payments, or isn't that how that works?
Yes. Through the new market tax credit transaction, the CRA pays them a lease payment, and then they utilize that lease payment to pay some of the debt. And that process does create some additional revenue each year that we could utilize.
But the suggestion to collapse it or dissolve the CDE is not what's being asked in number 16. Mr. S. Evans, is that your understanding?
Well, number 16 was submitted by, the questions are submitted by.
Obviously, I guess I don't understand. Commissioner Lanier is suggesting that there's some sort of collapse, but that's not how we have our CDE set up to operate in a fashion that it will be dissolved, or there's some mechanism to dissolve it, or need to dissolve it, I should say.
Well, of course, the transaction does change after the 7-year period, and that timeline is coming up. I believe it's in July of this year. What we do at the CDE following that transformation of that agreement, I would ask for additional comments from the developers.
Follow up.
Yeah, well, the broader purpose of the program was designed so that low-income communities like Riviera Beach can use it to attract private capital. And billions of dollars are allocated each year. And this Riviera Beach CDE was structured in order to do that. Private capital typically flows to areas that are affluent with high growth. And so communities across the United States have used the New Markets Tax Credit Program to raise capital, to put restaurants in place, to to develop hotels. And to Ms. Lanier's concern, the tax credits would, if Riviera Beach CDE applied and won an allocation, they would own the tax credits. They control the utilization. They sell those tax credits and they make money. The benefit to the developer is that it attracts private capital to lower the cost of development in markets that are untested. And it is a great program. Whether we as the developers look to complete the application and manage it or not, there are other people that with the CRA's track record could probably do a good job of helping the CDE secure tax credits so that it could attract private capital in order to do different elements in the marina, the festival marketplace, the hotel, the restaurants.
Madam Chair?
You're recognized.
Mr. McCoy, what I was alluding to is that all of the CDEs are dissolved after 7 years, not just our CDE. The next application is in September of this year, and decisions won't be known until next year, 2022. The CDE is, of course, a tool of the city and the CRA. And, you know, one of the questions I have been wanting to ask is we don't even know who the board members, I don't know who the board members of the CDE are. And I think that this is a very, even though this is going to be possibly dissolved in July, this is an item that needs to have a serious discussion in regards to how the city wants to use this entity. And I think that right now it's just not timely for us, given the last 15 questions that we've had. There are some issues that we just can't make a decision on tonight, given the complexity of them. So I think this is one of those issues.
Anyone else? Mr. Evans, do you need an answer on this tonight?
If it's the board's desire to discuss this in a subsequent item, we can bring it back to you.
Okay.
It's the pleasure of the board.
Madam Chair, and I think the only point I'm making is you have this tool in your toolkit, and it's an effective tool, and it should be utilized.
Quick question, Madam Chair.
Yeah.
Mr. Evans, when does the CDE sunset?
I believe we have it set to, I think, September.
September?
Yes.
And
I thought Mr. Scott Evans just said July.
So the transaction was approved 7 years ago in July for the new markets tax credits. So I believe that's when that transaction transforms and some of that debt is forgiven. I'm not sure if the CDE is automatically dissolved, though.
Right. And Mr. Evans is correct. The CDE doesn't dissolve legally. It's tied to whether or not Congress allocates new markets tax credit programs, and with the recent CARES Act, they extended another 5 years. So $5 billion get allocated every year for folks to competitively apply. I think as I explained in the last meeting, we use new markets tax credits to finance this building. The CRA had budgeted $4 or $5 million to build the event center. Once we added a second floor and other elements, it extended the budget to like $7 or $8 million. And so KeyBank became the investor with Mr. Haygood's structuring. The CRA made a loan to a nonprofit it created and controls in order to attract the $1.5, nearly $2 million from KeyBank. KeyBank makes its money on the tax credits, total of $7 million. So at the end of the 7-year compliance period, instead of repaying KeyBank, they're going to take the note and give it to the CRA. And so you'll forgive it. And so in essence, through the tax credit program, KeyBank subsidized the construction of the event center with $2 million, or about $1.5 million. And so that's the value of being able to structure new markets tax credits, particularly with the CRA as a tool. It becomes a very innovative way to jumpstart private development at the marina.
So follow up,
Go ahead.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah.
So in the event that this is a tool that we use for additional capital, for funding and support for the city and for development, I would absolutely like to see the city explore the ability of using the CDE as a option for additional funding. I do not want this to be a delay in the process of negotiations or discussions with funding as a requirement, but if it's an additional vehicle or tool to assist with additional funding, then absolutely. But it's not going to be contingent upon us obtaining funds or the CDE obtaining funds, but absolutely, if it's something that can benefit the city in a way that's going to bring additional funding and support for this project and get it done, then by all means.
And also, if you guys don't mind me just adding, where this also becomes important, as you were talking about the subsequent residential tower and the possibility of increasing height and densities on that site, yes, the cost will increase by doing that, but using a tool like the CDE can be infused into the project in order to subsidize additional costs in order to get an outcome that you want. If there's a national credit tenant that you really want at the site, or some type of cultural attraction that needs to be subsidized in order to be brought to the site but will increase foot traffic, you can then use these type of dollars in order to create the difference or close the gap or a but-for gap in order to do something that you want. So it's not really purely a tool in order to generate profits for the developer. It's really a tool to have at the table so that we can all be collectively more creative about producing the outcomes that you want at the marina.
Okay, so what's the downside? I don't see a downside.
Madam Chair?
Yeah. Please, you recognize. I'm sorry. Getting tired.
Thank you. I think that this needs to be reviewed and closely looked at before we do anything with this. Now, my question is, does the CDC hold any funds now? And what is coming to it in the very near future? We need to know what is there now and what is coming in the very near future and make a decision about how that will be able to relate to development, and not just this particular development, but we have other developments in the city, in the CRA that is going on that we also need to prioritize as well. So if we're going to have a discussion about the CDE, we need to know where we stand with it now, what money is there now, what money is potentially coming to it, and look at how we're going to utilize those funds, not just for this particular project, but our other prioritized projects that we have in the CRA.
But with that, does that preclude our saying that we want to use it for this project? Yeah. Because you want to use it for other projects? Does that stop you from using it for this project?
Madam Chair, if I may.
Yes.
We don't have that data available at this particular moment, but we can certainly bring that under discussions and deliberations under the Executive Director report at your next council meeting to provide additional clarity with regards to the activities associated with the CDC, who sits on the CDC, and CDE, sorry, and the what that mechanism can be utilized for.
Okay. Okay.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Madam Chair.
You're recognized, Mr. McCoy.
So no objections. I just wanted to go further on the point of the monies that's being held in the CDE, because I guess I just looked it up on Sunbiz, and I guess for all intents and purposes, it defines the composition of who initially made up the CDE. But Mr. Evans, Scott Evans, can you speak to the monies that's being held, what the source is, and a roundabout of what that balance is?
I would have to bring the balance back at the meeting referenced by Mr. Evans, but the source of the funds is the CRA leases the event center at an annual rate, and then the CDE in their Riviera Beach LLC, which is another event center LLC, which is a subcomponent of that, then pays debt payments, and the difference between what we lease the event center for and the debt payments creates a revenue source for the CDE.
So this arrangement, the margins that was I guess agreed upon between the Marina Event Center, the CDE, and the CRA, how is that established? By resolution? Because I mean, obviously we don't represent the CDE. I don't even know what to say, but ironically, you're the only registered director on the CDE on SunBiz as of current. So I want to know, like, do you make the sole? Well, I'm sorry. So does the executive director make the sole decisions? Because that's not what called for in the bylaws.
So yes, the executive director of the CRA is the president of the CDE. So that needs to be updated.
And there are 4 additional board members that had to be qualified under the CDE regulations. Basically, business people who lived within the area. And I think it's currently made up of the executive director, 1 person from the city, 1 person, 2 business people, and a 3rd, I think, city employee or CRA employee. We're going to be bringing information back to you because the compliance period is up in July, as was stated. So we're going to bring you a memo explaining exactly what's going to happen, what funds are still within the CDE, and give you just a complete background on that. We've retained the bond counsel who actually set up the program, who gave us a tax opinion to bring the procedures back to you. But again, that'll be coming in July. It's not really a city. In fact, you're specifically prohibited from having any elected officials on it. So we'll be bringing it back, though, to you for your information.
Madam Chair.
Follow up.
Recognized.
So I certainly want to see the balance, right? Because that would seem to be able to cover some of these existing things that we're speaking of, like the common area maintenance, like the monies that's being owed to the city that we call for debt, or to go right back into being reinvested right back into the upland properties. But if the money's just sitting there, right? What's really the purpose if we've earned the money as well? The CDE has earned the money, or should I say, in the role as the executive director, who would be the president, earned that money. Well, obviously the CDE earned that money. We need to be reinvesting that back into the very marina, or bring that to the table as a point of discussions, or a point to negotiate those dollars, because it does nothing just sitting there. Because I guess what I was trying to arrive at is that there is no functional expenses that we can expect that comes out of the CD every, monthly or quarterly or even annually.
They just have the regular expenses that were created when we first created the CDE and completed the new market tax credit transactions, such as insurance. We have to pay to an accountant to file taxes, just very, very limited other costs.
Right, but those are already absorbed in the amount of the rental payments, and all of that is accounted for.
Yes, sir.
In the regular agreement between the Marina Event Center. Did you say Marina Event Center LLC?
Event Center LLC.
Event Center LLC.
And there was a management. It was a very complicated transaction. But there was a management fee also paid to the CRA. And so all the CRA, the money will go back to the CRA, whatever's in the CDE, except for trying to keep money in for normal expenses.
You're recognized, whoever's.
Chair?
Yes. Is that Commissioner Miller Anderson?
Yeah, I just also.
Lanier, go ahead. It's hard to distinguish. I'm sorry. Go ahead, whoever wants to.
That's fine. Yeah, we need to get a report about where that money is and how much is in there. A part of that board it has to be a low-income resident. And given that professional services fees are paid out of that money, Mr. Haygood could very well be paid out of that, being paid or could be paid out of those funds as well. So it's a very complicated, not complicated, but it's a process, and it's a entity that the board needs to have more information on. We need to be well versed in it, and we need to know what it means and what it means for us as a board to be able to either put these funds out, put them to where we want them to be put, but we need to have some background and information about exactly what this CDE is and what our role in it as a board.
So, Mr. Evans, you're going to bring us back something at the next opportunity, right?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Have we addressed all of the questions?
That concludes all the questions.
Okay. Is there anything else? We don't have comments from from CRA Director or staff. So, if there is nothing else, this meeting is adjourned.